State government should be as open and accessible as your favorite state park or hiking trail. Preserving a transparent and accountable democracy is just as vital as protecting the natural wonders we cherish. Wisconsin's parks and lakes are treasures we want to safeguard for future generations. We must also care for the foundations of our democracy: openness, access, and truth. Ask yourself, what kind of Wisconsin do I want for my children? One where democracy is as accessible and inviting as our scenic trails? Supporting Wisconsin is a way to make that vision a reality. Donate to wisi.org/donate or text WISI to 44321.
Since 2007, Wisconsin Eye has filmed countless hours of state capitol coverage to provide invaluable access to government actions, all available to watch live and on demand. Without Wisconsin Eye, Wisconsinites would lose an important source of transparent and unbiased accounts of public policy and politics. Give today to secure the longevity of balanced, unfiltered civic programming. You can do so at wisi.org/donate or text WISI to 44321. To support your access to transparent and unbiased accounts of public policy and politics, please consider a donation. You can do so at wisi.org/donate or text WISI to 44321. Your donation is critical in supporting transparent and unbiased accounts of public policy and politics. You can donate at wisi.org/donate or text WISI to 44321.
Transparency to order. Could we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, which will be led by Representative Baer.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The clerk will now call the roll.
Representative Nedwesky.
Here.
Representative Sortwell.
Here.
Representative August is excused. Representative Gustafson.
Here.
Representative Steffen.
Here.
Representative Knodel.
Here.
Representative Baer.
Here.
Representative Hong. Hello. Representative Cruz.
Here. Thank you. Please, everyone in the room, take a moment to silence your cell phones and any other devices before we begin. I will remind the committee members to press your button when you are speaking so that the folks watching on WISI can hear you, and make sure you turn it off when you're not speaking. As a reminder, the rules of this committee instruct that excessive cell phone use and side conversations should be taken outside the room, please. The committee is supported today by Legislative Council attorneys who have special knowledge in the area of education: Katie Bender-Olson, Emily Hicks, and Abby Gorzlanchuk. Thank you for that. I guess we'll get started. I'd like to start by saying that the safety, health, and welfare of our children, both in school and outside the classroom, should be a top priority for all of us. The purpose of this informational hearing is to have an open and transparent public discussion with key stakeholders regarding the teacher license revocation or surrender process in cases of immoral conduct under Wisconsin Statute 115.31. The public has a strong interest in questions recently raised about this process and in how DPI is interpreting the laws that provide its framework. They also have a fair and appropriate concern about the level of transparency provided to them by the Department of Public Instruction when a teacher is being investigated and about their access to details of those investigative outcomes. We will keep the focus of this hearing narrow, and non-germane discussion will not be entertained. Out of respect for participants and their time, I ask that committee members please stay on topic. Attempts to distract from the topic of the hearing or derail conversation will not be tolerated. Legislative Council has prepared a very helpful and comprehensive memo on sexual misconduct against students by school staff that has been shared today with the committee. To set some foundations for what we will hear today, I'd just like to read a little bit from that memo. Sexual misconduct by school staff may trigger 3 types of procedures and consequences. 1, criminal charges following investigation by law enforcement. 2, termination or other employee discipline following investigation by a school or school district. Or 3, professional license revocation following investigation by DPI. A school staff member may face some or all of these consequences. Suspected sexual misconduct crimes are investigated by law enforcement, prosecuted by a district attorney, and punished by criminal penalties imposed by a sentencing judge. School districts and DPI may report suspected criminal sexual misconduct by school staff to law enforcement, but criminal investigations and convictions are separate from employment and licensure actions. So today we will first hear from law enforcement about their role in cases of misconduct by a school employee against a student. In these cases, law enforcement investigations are into potentially criminal activity. Then representatives from DPI will have an opportunity to explain their role in allegations of immoral conduct. In these cases, DPI is investigating with the objective of determining whether or not a teacher's license should be revoked under Wisconsin Statute 115.31. These are different standards than law enforcement uses in a criminal investigation. With that, we will ask Chief Patrick Patton of the Kenosha Police Department to come forward with his team to share some information from the perspective of law enforcement. I did ask Representative Baer if he'd like to make some opening statements as the ranking member.
Thank you for that, Madam Chair. Appreciate the privilege. And thank you for having this hearing today. I'm glad we're here, and I can say that as a parent of 2 public school students. This is an appropriate use of this committee, and this hearing fits a mission that I think you will find agreement on both sides here that this is something worth looking into. and that's that we should do everything we can to make sure that our kids are safe in our schools. I think we're going to learn today that the article in the Cap Times had fair characterizations of some things, like data tracking and underfunding by this legislature, and some things that weren't fair or characterized to their full potential, like what a voluntary license surrender means in practice. It also conflated or maybe confused who does what in this process. I think your brief description just now, Madam Chair, was very useful between school districts, law enforcement, and DPI. And that article, I don't think, did a very good job of that, so I appreciate the memo from Ledge Council and that clarification. I think we're also going to learn today that our kids are less safe in private schools than they are in public schools, and I hope we have some discussion about that. And I think you'll find that we on this side are willing bipartisan partners in fixing what needs to be fixed. So I hope that that's our focus today. Appreciate that commitment already. DPI needs resources. They need funding. They need more staff. They've been cut over the years and to their detriment, to the detriment of the safety of our kids. They also need some additional powers. I think we ought to talk about what that statute you mentioned, 115.31, which defines immoral conduct by teachers, what that means, and if it goes far enough, and whether there are enough training and resources available for our teachers and administrators to respond to what we've identified. Obviously, there is a problem. Finally, I'm disappointed that Dr. Underly is not here today. She should be here. I conveyed that to her team twice in the last week. Disappointed that she's not. I'm grateful to Tom and Rich and the team at DPI for their responsiveness over the last week and helping me understand these issues. I'm sure they're well prepared for us today, as are our friends in law enforcement. Thank you for being here. So please, Madam Chair, count on us as willing bipartisan partners in looking into this and making sure that our schools are safe, our students are safe, and that there's accountability and transparency, to borrow two words from the committee's name, in teacher licensing in both public and private schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Appreciate that. Welcome, Chief and team. I want to thank you for being here to share your perspective on this important matter of protecting children in our schools and from predators. In February of 2024, a local news outlet in the Kenosha area broke a story about an elementary middle school teacher named Christian Enright accused of grooming a 14-year-old female student. The story spread very widely to other media outlets quickly, and it was really put a big bright spotlight on the case. The public response from parents and the community was not surprising. People were rightfully very concerned about the safety of their children. This committee has asked you here today to help us understand the difference between an investigation into allegations of misconduct of a school employee against a child by law enforcement compared to investigations done by DPI related to licensure. We will hear later in this hearing from DPI about their investigative process and their narrow role as it relates to licensing. To illustrate the role of law enforcement and how they typically interact with school districts in these cases, perhaps you could share with us a brief overview of the Enright case, how it unfolded, and what the outcomes were. We're interested in understanding what works well for law enforcement in these cases and what maybe the legislature could do to help that process be improved.
Sure. So in reference to the Enright case, I think as we walk through it, you'll see the overarching theme is there was a lot of concerning behavior and not a lot of legislation that we could fit that behavior to a criminal case. So in February of 2024, we learned about a case through what we refer to as a CPS tip. And that's a tip meaning someone reported to Child Protective Services that there was concerning behavior involving a minor. That case got sent to us on the 2nd of February, or got sent to CPS, on 2nd of February, and we learned about it on the 5th of February. What we did not know is that this behavior was learned on the 1st of February, 4 days earlier, in which another student of the victim, or a friend of the victim, approached school staff and said, I believe my friend is having an inappropriate relationship with a teacher. The school's response at that time was to call the student in, ask them if it had occurred, and ask and remind them how inappropriate that is, and then sent the child back to school or back to class. Also notified the teacher that the allegation was made and sent him back to class. The parents were not notified at this time, and like I said, we learned about it 4 days later, and that's when we notified the parents, and they had still not been notified by either CPS or the school district. Throughout the investigation, we did learn that despite that conversation happening in the very beginning of February, over those 4 days, communication between the teacher and the student continued via Snapchat, and it created a lot of issues for us in the investigation because Snapchat and a lot of those different tools that they use to communicate were being deleted and erased. So we lose potential evidence. That's why it's so important for law enforcement to be there on the front end. Throughout the investigation, we had learned that there were multiple students that may or may not have had information on this. So it took us a while to start interviewing everyone involved. We ended up having to go through cell phone downloads, and part of the processing in those cell phone downloads takes time. At the same time, the KUSD is running a parallel, the school district is running a parallel investigation as to what happened. Ours is obviously much more in depth. We're able to get much more information. And we had learned over the course of the investigation, putting that child through 2 forensic interviews to try to figure out exactly what occurred, and downloading not only their phone, but the phone of the suspect. We learned that over a period of over 6 months, there were thousands of messages exchanged at all hours of night. At one point, and during the peak of what we observed it to be a relationship, we observed over 600 messages in a 72-hour period in and out of school between a teacher and a student. We identified 112 images that were shared that we identified as concerning, but didn't quite meet the requirements in current legislation. At the time of our investigation, Chapter 948.098, Act 200, did not allow us, was not enacted yet, so it is not a tool we had to take action on. Through multiple conversations with our district attorney's office, we really struggled to find what crime does this fit. The biggest problem we have, unlike with all criminal investigations, is we have to prove mens rea or criminal intent. And proving that when the act or the overt act has not occurred yet became a real challenge because there was no law in the books that allowed us to charge this individual out. Obviously, the school district had limited information, and they were very concerned on when they could bring their teacher back to work. That communication becomes complicated because we're running a criminal investigation that is trying to make sure that we can build the case, but we also have an underlying concern that this suspect is going to return and put it into an atmosphere and an environment where they're going to be able to have interaction with children again. We kind of went through the entire thing, talked with the district attorney's office, and the hang-up we had was because we had no law that applied specifically, there was no act that actually occurred, and we couldn't prove any of the images rose to the general statutes that we use to protect children. We had to get with our district attorney's office and find a way to apply something that we normally don't, and we applied disorderly conduct charge to the case. That is not normal. I had not seen that in my 20-plus years of law enforcement, but we knew that the behavior that we saw, the communications that we observed, and the preying on the trust that this child had for the teacher was not right. It was not moral, it was not ethical, and we needed to do something. The district attorney's office worked with us, and we were able to charge multiple counts of disorderly conduct, and that's where the case resolved. The big thing that we're looking for and the big thing that we're hoping we can bring to this body in general is just understand the challenge that we have as law enforcement when we don't have legislation that is clear and we don't have legislation that we can appropriately apply, and that's where we would look to this body for help. Grooming is a real problem. It is one that we are seeing more and more, and this is not specifically a problem to teachers, but that is one that we're obviously here and when we talk about the intersectionality of the relationship with DPI. It's a gradual and calculated process that we're finding abusers are using to lure and prey on the trust that these victims have to ultimately successfully assault children and victimize children. We are finding that this is the first red flag, and if there's legislation in place that can help us attack that, and as law enforcement, enforce that as law enforcement, we're going to do a better job of protecting our kids. I think I'd wrap up with the hardest thing with this case is throughout this process, which ended up taking several months because we could not find a charge to hold this individual accountable while still holding the evidence that every single one of us felt uncomfortable with. was we had to repeatedly go back to this family, this child's family, and tell them, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do. So if we have to close with anything here, I just ask that this body helps us, gives law enforcement a tool where we never have to do that to a child and their family again. With that, I can take further questions.
Thank you very much for sharing that story. I have a few questions to start off with. In the process of the investigation, in this particular case, the teacher was sort of out of the classroom for a while and then at some point was returned. Do you have any influence or say as law enforcement if a teacher has been removed from the classroom when they get to go back, or can you prevent them from going back?
Yeah, we have no oversight on what a school district does with their employees. The challenge we have is how much information we can share with an ongoing criminal investigation. While this case still ended up having a decent resolution, it was not easy, and part of that was complicated by the fact that the school district conducted an investigation and a notification to those involved out the gate. One of the greatest benefits to law enforcement is when we have the information and can conduct an investigation, knowing as much as possible before individuals can prepare defenses, delete evidence, and stuff like that. So it's tough for us to share as much information as we would like with the school district. And the school district obviously has their own challenges on which information they can share with us regarding employment. But we do try to communicate and say what we believe is concerning and kind of direct them in certain, suggestions. And when we see something that rises, we generally, our department has practice, while there is no legislative requirement, we do contact DPI. What they do with it is up to them. They're the oversight committee for that.
Okay, I have a question for Ledge Counsel. What the chief was trying to say was there was some texting and images exchanged between these two people that didn't meet a standard for violating a current law. Can you maybe describe which one of those laws would be one of the 948s?
Sure. There is a crime that's specific to sexual misconduct by a school staff person, and that would apply to any public, private, or tribal staff member who engages in sexual misconduct at that school. And sexual misconduct has a very particular definition under that statute. It means verbal contact of a sexual nature or physical conduct of a sexual nature. And those phrases each have further defining information within the statute, but all of it does have sort of a relation to some sort of sexual behavior. So whether it be verbal or physical, there is sort of an element there that is sexual in nature. And if there were exchanges that didn't have that element involved, then it wouldn't rise to the level of bringing a criminal charge.
And can you remind the committee how that law changed in the last session?
Yes, there was an act enacted that did create that crime itself and made some other related changes.
So that change didn't happen until after this case occurred?
Correct. Unfortunately, this case happened about a month and a half before the law was signed into place, so it was not a tool we had at the time. That law would have been and would have applied at that time. We could have used that law. Obviously, you can't go backwards, but what I will say is while that law helps, and that law would have helped this specific case, we have since had cases that are very, very similar, but because of the very specific language in that law, it says that they have to be a school member within the school. Mm-hmm. We have had incidences of the same type of behavior between a teacher and a student, and we're not able to apply that law because that teacher has started that communication after they left and they were a substitute teacher in the school. They are no longer in the same school, so that law cannot apply. Even though the behavior is the same, the teacher has changed schools, is still doing the exact same act, but the law is so specific that it has to be in the same school. It has, again, handcuffed us from being able to apply.
And then another question for Ledge Counsel. As it relates to grooming, which is not necessarily the same thing as sexual misconduct as defined here, does Wisconsin have any law on the books making grooming a crime?
We do not have a grooming crime in Wisconsin.
And other states, there are some other states that do?
There are some states that have created a grooming-specific crime, yes.
Would that have been helpful in this case?
Yeah, I think anything that can actually talk to this behavior. We understand the complexity of this because we're trying to stop children before they become victims because we're seeing how individuals are preying on them. So yes, this would have been very, very helpful. Chapter 948 is generally where we go for to protect children. It did not have anything specific with the words grooming, even though we know that behavior is becoming more common.
Questions from the committee? Representative Stefan?
Yes, thank you. First, could you please introduce yourself,
Sure.
your rank, as well as your service?
Yeah, I guess that probably should have came out of the front end. But my name's Chief Patton, Patrick Patton. I'm with the City of Kenosha Police Department. I've been in law enforcement for over 20 years. Additionally, I'm the Vice President of the Wisconsin Police Executive Group, and I serve on the Legislative Committee for the Wisconsin Chiefs of Police Association.
Okay, thank you. And that isn't my one question, by the way. Chief, so you, for 20 years, you've been serving this capacity, and today you provided us some good insight on how we can address some of the criminal side, as you mentioned, Chapter 948 relating to this. Part of what we'll be discussing today relates to how the public education, DPI, can make adjustments within how they're acting, or either legislatively or maybe just doing what they're supposed to be doing. So thank you for making sure that there's some clarity that these are separate things.
They are.
So 20 years of service. In preparation for this hearing, I did some research, and I was shocked, maybe you're not, by some of the facts relating to this, and I just would like to get your response. So 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 13 boys are subject to child sexual abuse. And of those numbers, 99% had child sexual grooming as an element relating to that child sexual abuse. Do those figures, based on your 20 years of experience working in this space, do those numbers, while alarming, do they shock you in terms of their accuracy?
Unfortunately, at this point, it does not shock me. It's just disheartening. Obviously, we've learned that this is a tool. The way that children communicate nowadays, and the way that communication can happen so rapidly, and sometimes in the shadows, has spurred an environment where this is one of the more favorable ways that individuals prey on children.
So we're talking hundreds of thousands of public school children. Is that accurate, roughly?
Well, in the nation, yeah. Yeah, and they're all, I mean, every kid today has some sort of electronic device that they can communicate over.
Thank you.
Representative Baer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You talked a little with the chair, and we talked a little with Ledge Council about Act 200, and so I just want to be clear and make sure that it would have been useful for the case you talked about.
Yes.
There are cases you've had since then where it's not useful or not applicable because of timing or who the person is and what their employment status is. Can you just clarify where is the problem, or what's the barrier to making sure that applies to cases where you think it should?
With Act 200 moving forward?
Yeah.
So I think the best way to describe it is that is very, very specific to within the same school. That language,
Okay.
that one line in there really limits the ability. When you think about the educational environment and school staff environment, think of like the teams that have that rely on mentors, or they rely on teacher coaches that are now coaching after hours. If they're coaching for a school that's not theirs, it would not apply, but the same behavior could be occurring. I am less concerned about the role, and law enforcement is less concerned about the role and the relationship more than the behavior and the access to
Right,
victimized children.
Of course, yeah, that makes sense. It's just clearing up where the statute's not helpful today?
It was, so the statute, for some history, oddly came out, and was spurred from some of the an incident previous to this one that also occurred in Kenosha that got this started. And in its early adoption, we felt it was going to be very, very useful because it addressed the specific problem that we had, the place that we failed in the first place. The new legislation came forward. It would have addressed this one. But again, we've already seen another case in which it's the same behavior, it's the same type of preying on a child, preying on trust and opportunity, and it just so happens that the employment status within how the statute's written bars us from being able to apply it.
Employment status. Okay, great. Well, we've got one thing for the to-do list, I think. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ledge Counsel, could you just repeat on the sexual misconduct, the part where it says it's within the same school?
Yes. So within, the statute itself is 948.098, and subsection 2 of that statute says, any school staff member or volunteer who commits an act of sexual misconduct against a pupil enrolled in the school is guilty of a Class I felony.
So this was a situation where the teacher had moved on to another school.
Correct.
It started in the same school, moved on, and then you couldn't charge that teacher.
We are
they weren't
unfortunately
in the
staring
same
down the exact same problem.
Yeah.
Just because of the language, that one line in the language. And it's very restrictive for us, but at the time when it was enacted, it did address what we had previously. Oddly, it would have applied very well to this Christian Enright case. Unfortunately, it was signed into law. I believe it was almost 6 weeks later.
Yeah, it was right after. Representative Sortwell?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And before I ask my real question here, I did want to know who the other officers are who are sitting with you, Chief, and what their experience is.
Sure.
Because
I'll
it
let
might be
you-
relevant for who I direct a question at, right?
Yeah. I'll let you introduce yourselves. This is their first time on here, Slowly.
I'm Deputy Chief Joe Labator, 29 years.
Officer Kate Shaper, coming up on 20 years.
And your experience then is student resource officer or what? I'm just trying to get the full breadth of what I'm looking at.
So this is the deputy chief of our department.
Yeah.
And she is a media coordinator for our department.
Okay, thank you. So on the real questions here. So you mentioned the disorderly conduct statute that you charged, and actually, sadly, that's not a new thing because I know Manitowoc County did it 20 years ago for a very similar case. But that gets to the crux of what I'm asking about here, which is obviously there's always bad people. There's always going to be bad people in all professions, and they're always going to find ways to try to get around and do bad things. I'm concerned, and I don't know if the rest of the committee is of the same mindset as I am, but I've heard some of the horror stories coming that have always existed in schools and other places, but it seems to me that this is growing. Not that maybe that's just a perception, maybe I'm wrong. And I talked with some of my local law enforcement, my district attorneys on this, and they seem to be of the opinion that they think it is more so that we are simply catching more of these bad people than that there are more crimes occurring. What would you or any of your either of your officers have to say about that in your experience? Are we simply catching more, and that's a good thing? Or is this something where there is something just inherently trending badly in our culture, particularly as it relates here in our schools, that more and more of these people are getting into this profession and then victimizing children?
Well, as far as the profession, I don't know. I can't speak to exactly if it's a profession problem. I believe it's a society problem, grooming in general. I will say, I think that why you're saying more coming forward, I don't think that this is a new problem. I think that this has been a historically underreported problem. I think there's victims of all different ages that may have experienced this throughout their life and have not had the resources, the support, or the education to bring it forward. Again, speaking with the previous legislators' comments, yes, it's growing. I think that because of the way children communicate nowadays, the accessibility to be able to communicate has opened up an entire new arena for those that want to prey upon this. We had very, very few cases up until probably 5 years ago of specific sexual predatory behaviors against children, specifically crimes against children and CSAM, or crime sexual abuse material. Very, very, very few cases of it. The DOJ has really put an emphasis on going after that through ICAC, Internet Crimes Against Children type units. We have created one in our own department, and of course those numbers are rising. I liken it to speeding, oddly, right? If we don't put a police car looking to stop a speeder, there's going to be no speeders proven on that road. Once we send officers and we give them the tools through legislations to find behavior that's concerning and a problem, they will go find it. They just need the tools.
Okay, thank you. And if I could add one other question, is for something the chief brought up, which was, you said something that raised a flag with me, and I'm wondering if this is a one-off thing or if this is a regular thing. You said that in this case that we had been talking about specifically, that the parents were not notified about these allegations occurring until you informed them, rather than the school, who had knew about it prior, informed the parents about that there could be misconduct. I mean, it's only an allegation, right? It might not be something for sure when you first find out about it. But is that something then that you have regularly experienced, at least where you have worked, either at Kenosha or elsewhere, where it is law enforcement that ends up telling the parents that there might be something going on days or weeks afterwards, versus the school being proactive about this and telling parents? I mean, I would think that a parent ought to know pretty much. It should be like the second call after calling you.
Sure.
But what's your experience in that?
It varies. I do think that schools are trying to do their best based on what they're tasked with to try to fulfill their mandatory reporting requirements. But one of those requirements that oftentimes gets overlooked is probably the most important, and that's the parent. And they should be receiving the calls as well. They should have the most input on how and what law enforcement's involvement is, how they're going to cooperate with us, because we're going to need that. These cases, when they involve a child, you have to try to remember the vulnerability of who we're dealing with, the vulnerability of what we're asking them to come forward and do. Reading through the report of this case specifically, this child was called in to a school's administrative office and questioned about an individual that she knew if she came forward would be in trouble, an individual she believed cared about her, an individual, if you read the messages, she believed she was loved by, and that maybe had a future with, at 13 years old. So when we talk about the importance of, when you ask about the importance of a parent being involved, I put aside my badge and then the police department's hat, and I'd say the parents come first.
Thank you, I agree.
Representative Knodel.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Chief, and your fellow officers for being here. You mentioned in your testimony, you talked about that your department did a more in-depth investigation than the school. And so I wonder if you can expand on that, how or what that relationship is between a school investigation versus a law enforcement investigation, and what spurs those things, or how they come about, or and how they...
Just to clarify, the cooperation between the two?
Well, the difference.
The difference?
Of those investigations.
Sure.
And your procedures. And then, and in that, I just wonder if an SRO you have SROs?
This school would not have. This was a junior high.
That school, but you have SROs.
We do have SROs in regular
some schools. So, if an SRO witnesses something on site in the school, if they can engage immediately in a different way than a follow-up investigation.
So, okay, so to answer your first question, the difference is vast. We're looking to, when we start an investigation, we're looking to establish probable cause to not only make an arrest, but we're looking to build enough case evidence to bring forward a successful conviction beyond a reasonable doubt in front of a jury of peers, right? The school district has a different oversight committee, a different a school board that will determine what the ramifications for employment are. But we're not looking to, and especially this case, we were never concerned or looking at what his employment status was. We were trying to hold him accountable for what we saw as preying upon a child. We will do things that I'm assuming a school district's not going to be able to, as far as getting warrants and subpoenas for different digital information, things that we would be able to bring forward to a court and obtain that a school district either would have to have it voluntarily turned over or would have to go through some sort of administrative process, things that I don't think that they would be able to get. Again, our investigation is strictly criminal. The employment status is not something that we play a role in. We do try to communicate to the best of our ability if there is a concern that we have enough evidence or we plan to bring forward any type of evidence that's going to result in a charge to the school so they can make as much of an informed decision on when that individual may or may not return to the classroom. In this investigation, we had to talk to a lot of different children because we did not know if there was one victim. We did not know what all the different children may or may not know. So it took some time, and I understand school districts have their own employment rules and contracts that they all have to go by. But from a law enforcement perspective, we don't have a concern with that. Our concern is making sure we have a solid case and we're holding those that do these actions accountable. To your second question, our SROs, yes, if we are in a high school, we observe this behavior, we would just start a case right then and there. We would notify the school district that we're starting a case, but it would be the same. They're mandatory reporters. They would not be able to turn a blind eye to anything they observe in a school. There are police officers in those schools. It would be the same as if they saw a crime out on the street. They have an obligation, a requirement, not only by their oath of office, but by our policies as well. So having SROs in the schools is a benefit. But again, if the report isn't made to an SRO, we're hoping and relying on a witness or someone to come forward just like we would in any other type of case. In this case, the one that we were speaking about specifically, it ended up being a friend who said they're having an inappropriate relationship. I've seen it and reported it to the school. It didn't make it to us to start an investigation until several days later via a CPS report, which the school district was doing to fulfill their mandatory reporting needs.
Representative Baer.
Yeah, thank you for coming to me again, Madam Chair. Appreciate that. Wasn't quick enough on a follow-up for Ledge Council on our previous line on Act 200, and we were talking about the timing and who's involved and where they work, employment status. But I'm curious now about the definitions of sexual misconduct. We also have immoral conduct, which relates to the license. And again, we have this problem of the different arenas where these investigations are happening. There's the school district, there's the law enforcement, and then DPI. And then we have this other concept of grooming that we don't have a definition of, but we have some things that sort of fit the characterization that we're hearing and one would generally think of with that word. Although that word, I think, has other meanings, other connotations that aren't useful in this context. But so how do these words all sort of work together in the statutes?
Well, there is a definition of sexual misconduct, which I alluded to previously, in that sexual misconduct by a school staff person statute. And that is specific to verbal contact of a sexual nature or physical conduct of a sexual nature. And then within the licensing revocation statute, separate statute, there's also a definition of immoral conduct, which is one of the bases upon which DPI could revoke an educator's license. And that definition means conduct or behavior that is contrary to commonly accepted moral or ethical standards and that endangers the health, safety, welfare, or education of any pupil. And then it lists a couple of things that are specifically included within that definition. But they are different definitions, and the things that would meet the elements required for the crime itself might be different then what would meet immoral conduct and qualify for a license revocation.
Okay. So exchanging sexually explicit images covered under both, contact of a sexual nature covered under both, things that sort of get close that might be one person's interpretation of grooming versus another. Like, is there some line? Is there some additional words that would be useful?
If you're talking about drafting a grooming crime itself, there certainly have been other states that have gone down that road. I think the challenge there is being specific enough to capture the concerning behavior that you're talking about without necessarily capturing any sort of contact. So I do think that that would be, a challenge for the legislature, but certainly something that we could pursue.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
It's a good thing that the chief and I have already been working on that. I want to clarify, just for the sake of putting it out there, we do understand that this concept of grooming happens outside the classroom as well. Correct. It can be with a coach. It can be with a child care provider. It could be with your next door neighbor. It could be a relationship between your mom's best friend and a child. I mean, it could be anyone. That criminal act could apply to anyone. For alleged counsel, the sexual misconduct law that you were just 948-098, that's just between a school staff member and a student of that school, correct?
Correct.
So it's very limiting to the school environment. It doesn't apply to those other situations. Would that be correct?
That's correct. I mean, we have other crimes against children that might come into play, like exploitation of a child, the child enticement, something like that. But this particular crime is very specific to school staff, yes.
I think what I really want is for the public to have an understanding of the difference between grooming and those other crimes in 948 and where there can be a blurry line. I don't know if you'd be willing to or try to describe some of the images in that Enright case that were sort of like, well, it's not child exploitation, it's not pornography, it doesn't meet that definition, but what were they like?
Sure. So when you talk about the images, I think I referenced about 112 of them that we identified as concerning. It was a lot about the context in which the communication was occurring. It was a little, I would say it was, if these were two adults engaging in this conversation, you would almost refer to it as flirting. You could see that there was a trust being grown over the communication. The communication in the Snapchat is essentially they're exchanging text message, but also text message with photo included. So a lot of the images that were going back and forth were of them at night, in bed, kind of going back and forth. When you talked about the other statutes in Chapter 948, many of them require the certain things for us to charge, exposed genitals, the types of stuff that we know are cut and dry for us to be able to make a charge for. What do you do when you see a picture, like in this Enright case, with an individual in a towel? There is no adult male in a towel being sent to a 13-year-old child, and that's their teacher. That's not illegal under 948 because it's not totally exposing what's defined as genitalia. What do you do when you have a picture of a teacher or an adult male sending a 13-year-old child a picture in their boxers with the outline of a penis, but because it's not exposed, we can't charge it? These were the frustrations that we had because we knew what was going on. We knew the cat and mouse that was happening. We could see the trust in this child being grown into an adult, and we had it really outlined his obsession and his overall goal, but we didn't have what was traditionally in 948, those hard-line definitions to be able to charge any of those. And I understand the challenges, and I thank you guys for helping us try to figure out how do we put a word grooming that we all know down on paper so law enforcement has the tools to make sure these kids aren't experiencing that.
Thank you. I think that helps a lot. One more question for Ledge Counsel. Is grooming, specifically the word grooming, or any language that would describe this type of behavior, patterned behavior, is that included in mandatory reporting?
The term grooming is not one of the specific bases that would trigger a mandatory report. The definition of abuse is really the trigger under the current statute and what qualifies as abuse under that definition. So I don't believe that sort of all of the behaviors that someone might think of as grooming would be captured under sort of that specific definition of abuse that we have in the mandatory reporter law.
Okay, appreciate that clarification. Any other questions from the committee? Representative Canoto.
Yeah, I think and perhaps just a technical for council. When you talk about verbal or physical connection, does the texting and Snapchat fall under the verbal description? But there's no voiced communication in that case.
Verbal conduct of a sexual nature. Well, the definition there is communications, so it could potentially capture more than just a voice-to-voice phone call. Communications made intentionally for the purpose of sexually degrading or sexually humiliating the student or actor, or sexually arousing or sexually gratifying the student or the actor. So there is more definition there that could potentially capture more than just a voice.
If I could get an opinion on that from law enforcement, do we consider that a verbal communication?
We would. I do think that there's an opportunity to clean that and add something like electronic communication. There are other statutes that have made that difference and specifically noted electronic communications. I think if we had a district attorney or I think legislative council could probably even speak to it, the more clearly defined that communication is in the law, I think the easier it is for them to apply if it ends up in a courthouse.
Representative Stefan?
Yeah, thank you. Question for Ledge Council only. So right now we're talking about criminal activity, 948 with law enforcement.
Yes.
So under those circumstances, we're dealing with generally probable cause, more likely than not, for charging. And then we have this higher standard as it relates to convictions. When we transition, because we're talking about law enforcement right now, we're also going to be transitioning to talking about DPI and immoral conduct. Do those same standards apply with the ability for DPI to make determinations and take actions in similar type cases?
There's not a beyond a reasonable doubt standard for a licensure revocation. It is probable cause, yes.
So the Department of Public Instruction they're not prohibited from a license revocation based on, let's say it is a 13-year-old who receives a picture of a teacher, male, in his boxers, outline of genitalia. They're not prohibited from acting in that situation?
So provided that they have probable cause and they conclude it fits in that immoral conduct standard, then yes, they could revoke the license.
Just a couple of final questions, unless, of course, we get more ideas. If a teacher voluntarily surrenders their teaching license to DPI and suspends or terminates, and DPI stops their investigation at that point. So the teacher voluntarily suspends their license, they're no longer a teacher, DPI stops any investigation that they had in progress. Does that trigger law enforcement to stop their investigation?
No.
Okay, good. Under what circumstances might law enforcement suspend or terminate their own investigation?
So this applies to almost any case, but the only time that we stop or suspend any investigation we're doing is once all leads have been exhausted or a case has been referred.
And does law enforcement have any indirect or direct authority to revoke a teaching license?
None.
Okay, that's it from me. Anybody else? Well, I guess you're off the hook for the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming and for your testimonies. Much appreciated to provide that clarification. While we wait for our friends to move around. We'll invite DPI up to the microphone. Why don't you guys go ahead and make yourselves comfortable, and when you're all settled in, feel free to introduce yourselves and your roles.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair Nedwesky. Members of the committee, good to see you again. My name is Tom McCarthy. I'm the Deputy State Superintendent of Operations at the Department of Public Instruction. Today I'm joined on my right by Rich Judge, who is the Assistant Superintendent for Government and Public Affairs, and on my left, Jennifer Camerud, who is our Licensing Director. I want to start by saying that when the department is made aware of grooming behavior, we use any authority that we can find to get that teacher out of the classroom or get that educator out of the classroom. As you heard from law enforcement, we are not an employing entity. Those are school districts that employ people. So our role is around the licensing system and how we can use licensing or the lack of a license as a tool to draw attention to the fact that this person should not be in the classroom. I just want to reflect and say I really appreciate you having law enforcement go first, because you're going to hear a lot of similarities to what they said around specificity being critical, and also order and sequencing of how investigations unfold. School districts are not professional investigators. Most school districts in the state of Wisconsin don't have people that are trained in trauma-informed investigation practices or any sort of the specialty criminal investigations that you would need to make sure that you are proving beyond a reasonable doubt that the information you're gathering is going to be able to put someone behind bars. They are there doing labor law. They are there trying to make determinations of should this person be in my school? Are they meeting the terms of their contract? So I just want to reflect and say it was good to have them go first because you're going to hear some overlap here. And I think it is going to hopefully allow for this committee to start thinking about what kinds of law changes or policy changes we can work together on to make this issue improved. I also want to say that the safety of kids is one of the most essential things that we do, and it's also one of the most essential things that school districts do on a daily basis. So when we hear about allegations of these things, we are deadly serious about this. We work with any and all partners available to us. You heard from law enforcement. They are one of our frequent flyer partners. We use all of the tools that we have available to request. We do not have subpoena power, but we do attempt to get information from anybody that can support a licensing investigation case. And given how sensitive these things are, we try to work as thoroughly and quickly as possible. We do receive incoming in terms of references for cases from law enforcement, from local school districts, other educational entities. Think about higher education, think about private schools. We do get accusations from members of the public. We take those seriously. And believe it or not, we comb news media ourselves because there are some times where an arrest of an educator will make the news before law enforcement, school district, or others have notified the department, and that triggers an investigation immediately from our department. I want to talk a little bit about something that Ledge Counsel has brought up before. I'm not going to read from my testimony, but it is kind of my outline, so if you're reading, know that's the direction I'm headed. There is a requirement to notify that exists in law. It sits underneath the immoral conduct statute in 115.31.3, and it was created by this body in the teens, the 20-teens, a great era of that time, that was designed to stop school districts from seeking a termination of a contract or employment and not notifying our licensing agency or law enforcement or others that there was behavior that was creeping up to being deeply inappropriate. And so it got slipped into the immoral conduct statute as a way to make sure that folks were being notified if there was something that was approaching something that should be known and noted in case files. I do want to say, though, state law does not require administrators to submit those same referrals if they're not hitting that same standard or if the license application is only pending in the system. So if you've got somebody that's sort of on track to being licensed, maybe they're a paraprofessional who does not have a license, they're seeking an educational license, something happens, the notification does not catch that, they are not required to send that to us. or if they bump them down into a different staff position that does not require a license in schools. So as you can see detailed in my testimony, we feel like there might be some gaps in the reporting requirements. And we'll get to some recommendations on that in a second. I do want to acknowledge you were having a very good conversation with law enforcement about 948-0983. That has been a tool that we've seen some change in behavior on. We don't get a boatload of referrals from law enforcement. So the volume is rather small coming through to us at this point in time. That is not a shot at law enforcement in any means. That is just an honest reflection of we appreciate the statute. It is helpful to us, but it is not changing the volume in a way that we think might be appropriate. So when we're inside of a licensing case, and Representative Steffen, you kind of brought this up, we take all the information that I was just outlining and use a reasonable suspicion standard. So we're looking for a small amount of evidence to say, has this person violated the statute? If we believe that is the case, we do move into an investigation. I think that the interesting part for us as the sort of consumer of a lot of other people's information is that we are using other information that we are receiving. We are not primary investigators. As I mentioned, we don't have subpoena power. So when we move to investigate, we feel like the standard has been met. We have to notify and provide due process to the complainant, the school district, the license holder, but it generally means at that point in time, we have enough to know something is probably off, but we're counting on and relying on other materials coming in the door to support our investigation. So that investigation status that lives online, and you can see, is usually the first indicator that, hey, we think something has gone a little wrong here and we need more information on that. All of that information is publicly available on our licensing website. You do have to know either the name or we call it the entity number of the license holder to be able to look them up. We have an antiquated system. We will get into that as well. I want to also address some of the closure of investigation pieces that you kind of were bringing up a little bit in some of the questions with law enforcement. Our role, again, in these circumstances is one of the nature of the license. So when we have successfully removed a license, we will conclude an investigation. We will pass that information if we believe charges need to be referred to law enforcement over to law enforcement so they can continue and proceed down that path. And we do have very good partnerships with law enforcement agencies around the state. Once an investigation has been concluded, all of those records are subject to open records. As you probably saw from some of the stories that have been out there, some of what you've seen reported was reported because open records requests were processed by the department and provided. There are some hiccups in state law around providing HR materials or personnel files. There's a Supreme Court case, I think you and I discussed, Chairperson Nedwiski, that is the Wisnicki law, as we call it, that requires notification of the actual file holder or the license holder, even if they don't hold a license anymore, that their files are being requested. They then have a sort of permissive window of time where they can object to things being turned over. There is a court proceeding that can sometimes happen in those particular instances. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about voluntary surrender. That's been a topic that has been hot of late. We attempt to get license holders to give up their licenses frequently through the investigative process. When we open a due process complaint, we send a voluntary surrender notice. At this current moment in time, that voluntary surrender notice is a lifetime surrender notice. We send additional requests for surrender if investigations are pending and we find additional information. And then at the conclusion of a case, we will also ask them to voluntary surrender. The reason that we do that is that inside of the immoral conduct statute, there is an automatic ability for license holders who have had their license removed to either immediately request or wait out a time period and request again. When we find behavior that is at a level of objection that you're triggering the immoral conduct statute, we do not want those people ever in front of kids again. It's very challenging to remediate or fix a license if you've done some of the things that we see in some of these investigations. So we believe that's a significant advantage tool in our ability to keep kids out of classrooms. I also want to address, we have a national system that we do a lot of business with. It is the National Association of State Directors of Teacher Education and Certification. You will hear us jargonly refer to that as NASDAQ. It is a national database where the department syncs information about revocations, tags individual cases related to what type of reason we remove them from. and shares with their partner states. When we get to a voluntary surrender status, that goes into NASDAQ. It is also reflected on our educator licensing page as a surrender, and the date of the surrender is listed as well. So I want to pause, take a brief breath before we get into some suggestions we'd like to provide. Rich, Jennifer, is there anything that you two would like to add before we kind of get into the space of some policy recommendations?
I think one key factor that's important to note is that typically, I think one key factor that's important to note is that typically our investigations, law enforcement has concluded their investigation by the time DPI is looking at it for a licensure investigation. There usually isn't a law enforcement investigation that's ongoing or pending. That's not a typical situation. It's usually done, a decision has been made not to file charges. That is the most common thing that we see in licensure investigations.
So I want to get into some proactive thoughts for us to consider, and you heard a little bit of the first one I'm going to offer from law enforcement. It would be incredibly helpful for us if we had some sort of statutory definition or terms for grooming to work from. As I mentioned at the top of my testimony, when we see grooming, we do something about it. The challenge is we're interpreting that as a moral issue inside of the immoral conduct statute. We believe we're right. We also believe that there is a legitimate pathway to somebody who believes that we're wrong about a moral judgment to challenging our order and dragging a case through a court. We've been down that path in some instances where we've had educators who believed that what they were doing was normal and totally reasonable, and we disagreed, and we're concerned that that is a potential leaky spot in our ability to go after all cases. There are some model legislation that other states have used. I think Chairperson Nedwiski, we talked a little bit about Illinois. They are based on NASDAQ, that national group I spoke to. There are some things that are common in grooming behavior or boundary crossing that can be addressed. I do want to make a plea or an ask that if we are in the space of trying to define grooming, that we also leave some space for professional decision-making for both law enforcement and the department. I think the last thing that we all want to see happen is another 94809 situation where you have a language that is tight, and if it doesn't quite meet the perfect definition that the legislature has contemplated, it will bind our hands from going after people. So that I just want to lay that out there. We've heard from other states that can sometimes be a challenge. And I want to talk a little bit next about the fact that if we have that statute, annual training might be something that we should consider for all educational staff, whether they are in public, private, charter, does not matter the setting. This is a serious issue, and as we have continued prevalence of electronic communications in our society, we need to be reminding folks of the types of behaviors and things that we expect from them. It doesn't matter what type of school setting you're in. If you have contact with kids, this is an important training that you should receive. I want to pivot next a little bit to reporting. We believe that there are some things that we could tune up in the reporting space that would make all of the investigations, whether they're law enforcement or otherwise, a little bit stronger. I also want to give you some examples of some of the gaps that we see in reporting that are causing some challenging for us. So if we have a definition of grooming, districts will know, school entities will know, when something has hit this stage, it has to be reported. Right now, they are making judgment calls about whether or not the reason that they termed is immoral conduct, is it grooming. We go around the state and talk to school lawyers almost every single year, multiple times a year, asking them to report anything that they think might meet this standard. But again, that's a judgment call that we're all making without a very spelled out law or policy in place that would be greatly helpful for folks so that they know if X, I do Y. Taking some of that away, I think, is taking some of that questionable judgment away will help all of us figure out how to do our jobs a little bit better. And let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about too. So if you have an educator who maybe their license is expired and they're doing business somewhere else, doing something else, and they commit a crime that otherwise would have triggered reporting, the department does not know about that. We have no means of knowing that. Their license may be expired and sitting out in the world, and if they come back to us and say, hey, I would like to have this license, we're relying on what's called a conduct and competency screen, where they would check off a box saying, hey, I was either charged or accused of this particular crime, and then they would be required to clear that conduct and competency screen with us. But if they check no, that could slip through the cracks, right? So we have a reporting ad. Go ahead, Jennifer. Sorry. No. Jennifer wants to jump in.
Sorry to...
No, you're good.
Apologies. My bureau does the licensing. And so when someone applies, it doesn't matter if they've had a license or anything. We get about 45,000 applications a year, and every time someone comes through our door, we do standard procedures, right? So we have criminal background checks where we get the CIB as well as the FBI check. We have the conduct and competency that Tom has mentioned. In addition to that, we have a NASDAQ check, so we check if they've ever been in another state and had anything happen to their license in that state. We also, depending on what they're applying for, check the driver record, the PARS, the public access request system, because some licenses require people to drive, like a driver education teacher. We check the DHS registry, and we also check the state and national sex offender registry. The conduct and competency is great because that's a great place to see, well, they're saying this, but we're seeing that. Or we're not seeing this, but they're saying that these things happen. And the minute we see anything there, we pause. We ask for more information. We work through our processes, often escalating things that we can't clear up to our satisfaction. I would also, though, say that as we are moving through processes, we get through that, and then one of our staff is processing the license application. If in the process of doing that, and they're trained on this, they see anything that says, oh, this should have come up, or they should have done a background because I can see that they got married, changed their name, but that's not something they said that they had done. It kicks back into background, and that stays there until these things can be cleared up. No application moves out of background until all of those things happen. It goes through background first before we even begin processing the license.
Yeah, and I apologize, Jennifer. Thank you for catching me. I was speaking specifically to an accusation of boundary crossing or grooming, kind of sliding around the lack of reporting. So thank you. I also, there is a challenge for us inside of some of the unlicensed staff spaces, not just volunteers, but if you have staff in either a private setting or an unlicensed setting completely where we don't have visibility, there is no reporting requirement or check in that space. So there could be a sort of passing that happens among unlicensed staff where you have known boundary violations, boundary issues, even up to grooming, where the licensing system would not be able to catch them because they're not required to have a license. I also just want to note, as I wrap up and leave some space for questions for you all, which I'm sure you have, the system that Jennifer described, our licensing system, is antiquated. I think its last big overhaul was sometime around 2011. Because of that fact, a lot of the time that Jennifer's team spends with our license holders is on making sure that they are able to interact with the system successfully. So we dedicate a lot of person power to making sure that our digital system is functional. I think that's a little backwards. So what we are trying to do right now, we have an RFP or a request for proposals in the field to gain some information about what would it cost in terms of a one-time injection of money from the legislature to upgrade our system so that instead of sort of chasing applicants or making sure that the quality of data coming in is good and that the system turns on every morning, we are able to do a little bit more license verification and auditing work with districts to make sure that there are qualified people in front of kids every single day. I want to stop there because we've given you a lot of written material too, and I'm kind of trying to overhash it to make sure we hit the top lines, but I definitely want to save some time for questions. So.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here. I'm going to start out by saying how I am deeply, deeply disappointed that Superintendent Underly could not bring herself to this meeting today. These are very, very serious questions. Tom and Rich, in all disclosure, did meet with me on Monday to go over some of this, so I had a prior understanding of what the DPI's procedures are when they're considering 115.31. And I appreciate that they took the time to do that, and they took the time to prepare testimony for today to help inform us all. However, I will note that Dr. Underly did not even call me. She did not send an email. She did not reach out in any way saying this date did not work for her. We would have gladly accommodated an alternative date for the State Superintendent of Public Instruction to be here in front of this committee and to hold her accountable for these claims that are being made publicly. And I guess she just couldn't find it important enough to be accountable to the public. It appears to me that this critical subject was not important enough for her to even acknowledge other than in a simple written response to the Cap Times article. And I guess she put out a video this morning. It's my understanding from her representatives that she's attending a Distinguished Alumni Award event today at her alma mater in Indiana, rather than fulfilling her duty to the people of Wisconsin. Maybe what distinguishes Dr. Underly is that she rarely, if ever, makes any kind of appearance in this building before the legislative body. We see Tom quite a bit, which I appreciate. For the representatives who are here today, I have an important question. Do you speak directly for Dr. Underly, and are the words that you say today expressly on her behalf, or are you speaking merely on behalf of DPI as an agency?
Chairperson, we've been in continuous contact with Dr. Underly about this topic. She is briefed. I am speaking on her behalf.
Okay. If that's the case, I'd like to point to Dr. Underly's letter Friday, October 17th to the Capital Times in response to their article from the 15th. She states the statutory definition of immoral conduct does not currently include grooming or professional boundary violations, limiting our agency's ability to obtain critical pieces of information. Okay? No, 11531 doesn't say the word grooming. It doesn't say a lot of things. Immoral conduct means conduct or behavior, according to the statute, that is contrary to commonly accepted moral or ethical standards and that endangers the health, safety, welfare, or of education of any pupil. I don't understand where there's confusion. Do we have to explicitly write the word grooming in this law to spell out that grooming is not commonly accepted moral or ethical standards? I tend to believe that most Wisconsinites would think the law is comprehensive and that any kind of behavior that resembles grooming in any definition is already covered there. And I see a letter that's published publicly by the state's top education person who other school districts look to for guidance and how they're going to execute these investigations, saying, I'm not sure if grooming's covered or not. I'm not sure if professional boundary violations are something we can look at or not. We kind of do sometimes, but because it's not in the law, maybe we don't. I think she's sending a very confusing message as to whether or not this is something that we're looking at when we're investigating the license status of a teacher who may have engaged in immoral conduct. And I really just want to put that out there and say I'm deeply, deeply disappointed that she couldn't come here and speak for herself today. Questions from the committee? Representative Sortwell?
Thank you. I have a couple of questions for you, and one of them goes off the lines of what the chairman was just saying here, which is, immoral conduct means conduct or behavior that is contrary to commonly accepted moral or ethical standards and endangers several people, including a pupil. Can you honestly say, sitting there, that you could take a survey of the people in this room, three-quarters of whom I don't know, that the vast majority of them would not say that grooming children is obviously immoral behavior? Is that the position of DPI and the superintendent, since you speak for her?
Representative, as I said in my testimony, when we find these things, we go after them. What I'm trying to explain to you both is that when we are dealing in a place where the behavior, as you heard law enforcement say, presents challenges about what is the line and where is the line, the department using all of its authority to put its foot down on these cases and revoke licenses, we're doing that in a space right now where the authority doesn't necessarily purely back us in every instance. We're still doing it, but you're asking us to make judgment calls about a vague and ambiguous statute. And we're trying to tell you that if you really, truly want to engage in a way to fix this...
No, I'm sorry here. The idea that it's overly vague to apply the standard was commonly accepted, that any person in the general public would have, I suppose the groomers themselves, so we could knock out the 1%, but knocking out the 1% who are just fine with grooming because they're the ones doing it. Do you really think that there's any other person in the Wisconsin public or the American public that wouldn't back you to the hilt on this if you pursued it every single time? Are you trying to tell us that that's the position of Jill Underly? I heard a bunch of word vomit. I didn't hear it actually answering.
Representative, I want to tell you a story about a case that maybe fits the mold that would maybe alarm you a little bit and show you the challenge that our community faces in this. The department received some allegations, I think it was probably around 2021, early in Dr. Underly's administration, that there was a band teacher in a school district that had been engaged in a lot of flirtatious, touching behavior that had been cleared by law enforcement, CPS. The department had previously investigated and had no victims come forward. We received a letter from a student that said, hey, I was that person. I am now of age. I am 18. I'm out of the house. I want this person taken out of the classroom. I am willing to come and testify directly to the department and sit with people to make sure that this kid does this, no other kid goes through what I did. We prosecuted that case. That's probably an inappropriate term. We reopened the investigation, brought additional victims in who were willing to give us information. We went after the license holder. We went all the way down through what should have been a criminal case, removed a license, and turned over that file to local law enforcement. That teacher is now behind bars because of the work that the Department of Public Instruction did. That case fell through all of the different guardrails that exist in the system. And what I'm trying to explain to you is that when you look at how the evidence is collected in some of these cases, and you are forced to make a judgment call about whether the communication between two people, as you just heard this gentleman saying, the chief of police in Kenosha, meets the standard or not because we're dealing with prosecution and we're dealing with keeping kids safe, that is a challenging thing, and we are asking the legislature to hang on a second.
Wait a second here. The officer said we're talking about criminal standards, and you know it.
I was going to say the same thing. DPI is not dealing with prosecutions.
We are dealing with judgment calls about whether communication is appropriate or not. We are dealing with incomplete information that comes from districts because districts do not have a good standard or understanding about when they should or shouldn't report. It's the same concept. It's the same problem. And we've talked about this, Chairperson. And I know that there's a bunch of cameras here now, and so everyone's amped up and excited. But this was a conversation that we made very clear Dr. Underly and her team wanted to collaborate with everyone on to get better results for kids. This is not some sort of cover-up or we're shifting things around. These are human beings in a complex system that are trying to keep kids safe.
I'm confused again.
How can we help?
So, I read from her letter on the 17th saying, I don't really know if grooming applies.
Where is that quote?
11531.
Sorry.
That's how I read it. Immoral conduct does not currently include grooming or professional boundary, implying that I'm not sure if we can use this or not. Then, in a letter delivered to Senators Jagler and Quinn on October 21st, she says, while the law does not specifically define grooming behaviors and professional boundaries, the department still pursues those violations under the definition. So she is saying in one, I'm not sure if they apply because grooming is not a word in the statute. But then in another letter a few days later says, while the law does not specifically define grooming, we do apply it. So what's the story?
The story is
are we applying this standard or not? Because in the most recent letter, we say 11531 is good enough. We don't need to add anything to it because we've been doing it.
I don't see that in that letter at all.
I see it as a public contradiction that is causing a lot of confusion.
I see us telling you in that letter that we are extending every ounce of our authority to remove grooming behavior from schools. We are using what other states constitute grooming. We are using evidence and information from how other licensing entities are doing that, and most of them are bolstered by some sort of state statute that supports that. That's what we are saying.
I do want to work together on this. You know I do. This topic is of high importance to all of us. I'm just very confused by Dr. Underly's public communications and how they're causing confusion and chaos in schools, not knowing which standards to apply in a very dangerous situation. So I have a question. You kind of alluded to the fact that there could be some people who might be against or who might question your interpretation of a moral judgment when trying to find immoral conduct. who would challenge that grooming is not immoral conduct? I mean, has there been a specific, I know for a fact that in some states where these laws have been worked on and put in place, that there have been teachers' unions who have been against anti-grooming laws or definitions of grooming as it relates to employment. And I can understand some concerns as how some of these situations might play out, but I would really like to know, in Wisconsin, in your experience, who would challenge that grooming is not immoral conduct?
If I may. So part of my role, I do the licensing, right? Our Office of Legal Services does the investigation work. On the back end of that, I get brought back in when we talk about the outcomes of what we're seeing in these investigation reports that our Office of Legal Services presents to us. We have to have, of course, the evidence to prove and back up what we believe is happening and what we're seeing. And the challenge, unfortunately, and the reason, we've been talking and the police officers here earlier were talking, is sometimes that evidence just isn't quite enough, right? We always move forward when we think that there is an issue. We always advise that. I'm in those conversations and I can say that. We sometimes know, though, that we don't have enough. If the person we're taking the action on decided to challenge it and we lose, that is a situation that then sets a standard and weakens our authority moving forward as well. So it'd be really, from my end personally, I have to tell you, it is really, really hard when you know something and you're going to move forward anyway because it's the right thing to do, but you really hope that that person doesn't challenge it, doesn't win, because at the end of the day, that's going to make it harder later. So that helps that perspective at all.
And I want to say, I think everyone is fired up because you're thinking about grooming as this concept of trading salacious pictures and the deep end stuff. We see cases where it is a clear boundary violation. Should not be texting that kid at that hour of the night, but they're texting that kid at that hour of the night about making sure they get to school. Is that grooming? Is that a standard that would trip grooming?
Does it fit the definition of immoral conduct?
I don't know.
I mean, I think
texting a child at night to make sure they have a ride to school on their like an SMS text to text, is that grooming?
That would have to. I mean, that's your determination of whether or not that fits the standard under 11531.
That is the challenge
I think
that
generally, the general public would say, if you have a teacher who's texting a kid at night, do you have a ride to school tomorrow because there's a pattern and they know that they might need some help getting to school, I don't think the general public would have a problem with that. I asked Ledge Counsel the other day.
My follow-up would be, if they're doing it frequently, does that then constitute a pattern of grooming? If they have to do it every single day, texting them at a particular hour? And then what if it's 2 texts a day? How do you apply some of those standards of boundary cross? These are the real cases that we see. They're real cases. And
I agree. We need to find a way to make this, facilitate this process better for everyone in both circumstances, for DPI and for law enforcement. But remember, you're using 2 different standards. The standards for immoral conduct are not as high. It's a lower standard to meet. I asked Ledge Counsel on Tuesday, when did the immoral conduct statute, when did that occur? When was that put in place? And we didn't get a history on it because it's been around for a long time. And you said it's a vague and ambiguous statute that's hard to use, but it was a good enough standard for many, many years, all up until recently, until we started questioning it. I think it's applicable. I don't necessarily think we have to start adding all of these specific things under immoral conduct. I think it's broad enough to apply with good reason when you're doing an investigation. Representative Baer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we're passionate because we care about our kids, and that's justified. And just want to take a deep breath and realize I think, Madam Chair, you and Tom agree on this, and I think you just acknowledged that. And Tom, your written testimony and what you talked through, and you ran through it fast, But I think what you have on page 2 going on to page 3 about grooming is actually quite useful advice for us, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate generally that you're making suggestions about how we can be helpful here. And it's things like including patterns of flirtatious behavior, making any, I'm reading directly from your testimony, patterns of flirtatious behavior, making any effort to gain unreasonable access to or time alone with any student with no discernible educational purpose, and on, and then asking for flexibility, which you made a good point, that's going to be useful in interpreting this and applying this, especially in a case like, are you going to have a ride to school tomorrow? Someone who's perfectly well-intentioned, that could be misinterpreted. So I think what the department is asking for is appropriate and seems to be in agreement with what my colleagues here are trying to eliminate. I'd like to get into some questions about the process, and Jennifer or Tom, I think, can be helpful here about, and it gets to one of Representative Sortwell's questions earlier about who's contacted when in these investigations. Do you have contact, so one direct question, do you have direct contact with parents, guardians, the grown-ups who are involved with the student? And then just sort of generally, what is you get complaints, you launch an investigation or not, you talk to law enforcement or not, all sort of depends and is subjective to the case and the evidence that you have before you and the evidence that you gather. But then what is the sort of follow-up with school district, with the educator themselves who's under question, and potentially with the student and parent?
So, thank you. So we get referrals from many places, right? Some of them come in through email to our Office of Legal Services. Some of them come in from forms from school districts, and some of them come in from community members or others who write into our online licensing help desk, right? It doesn't matter how they come in. The minute they come in, they immediately get sent to our Office of Legal Services. The steps they take, and I don't want to speak too much for them because this is the process that they have, but generally the steps they take and when they intake it, they have to, before they can put someone under investigation, they have to notify them they're being put under investigation. It's a due process requirement. And then it lives on our website on the license lookup as under investigation. I'd have to defer to Tom or Rich about what the Office of Legal Services does in terms of other conversations, but depending on the nature of the allegation, you have to think about like who is the next appropriate person to talk to. And so that's going to depend on the case and the facts around that case, kind of exceeding my interaction because I come in and again at the end part of this.
Right. And I think to Representative Barry, your question around the notification piece, you heard the Chief Patton speak directly to the challenge of school districts or the DPI when we notify and there's another criminal investigation pending that in essence we have sort of tipped off that there is something happening here, and it does put holes in ability to come to people clean with no bias and no information. Yeah. So we would also love some order and sequence to be spelled out in some way, shape, or form around these of how participation with law enforcement should work. Because as I said at the top of my testimony, school districts are not full of people that are trained forensic investigators. These are educators. And so making sure that we are doing the right work in the right space is pretty critical. Rich, did you want to add something?
I did, and this goes back to your point, Chairperson Nedwesky, but I think it addresses a number of the comments here. I think it's possible for two things to be true at the same time. On the one hand, I think it's possible that Dr. Underly is conveying an urgency in clarification in the law, not unsimilar to that which was expressed by Chief Patton earlier, saying that the law as it is helpful. The law clarified can be even more helpful. So I think her point is to advocacy. This is a challenging environment, as Tom said. These are difficult cases. They involve people on both sides, and they are hard to navigate because you have to make judgment calls. It is also true that we push our authority to the very limit on a daily basis when we are going through these things to exercise as much of that authority that exists under the immoral behavior statute. But would we prefer more clarity? Would we prefer more authority? Absolutely. But we do as much as we can with that, and we do not hesitate to push it to the exact limit. But as Tom referenced, if someone challenges that,
we don't have any protection of clarity in that statute. So two things can be true at once. On the one hand, we could use better statutory language, and on the other hand, we go at these cases seriously, intensely, and we take them to the max.
Representative Stefan?
May I add one? Is it okay? Okay. One thing I would just add is on the challenge front, just to make sure, I don't think I said this quite as clearly as I could have before. Every decision that we make on a license is appealable to an administrative law judge.
Even a settlement?
No.
If it's constructed, the settlement agreement, that they're waiving appeal rights, they do not have appeal rights. And we have had those cases challenged, whether that was a legal waiver of rights, and we have prevailed in those instances. And that is another reason why in instances where someone is willing to lifetime surrender, we prefer that because it takes any other either automatic reappeals or ability to challenge the decision off the table for us.
Representative Stefan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a couple rapid fire and then a final question, if that's okay. So, thank you, folks, for being here. Just backing it up a little bit. Beginning of the hearing, I had referenced some research that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 13 boys are subject to some level of child sexual abuse. Do you have a reason to disagree with that in general?
Please send us the research.
Sure. And then 99% of those situations are have an element of grooming, child sexual grooming involved. So I'm assuming nothing in that would shock you if it were true based on your understanding and your high level of indicated attention to child safety. How many students are right now in our public schools?
Around 800,000.
800,000. So that's 400,000 girls, 1 in 4, 200,000. So if that number is correct, somewhere between 150 and 200,000 girls may have been subject to grooming.
I'm not a statistician, but I would say you probably should back up and include private schools, which is another 120-something thousand,
sure,
and
perhaps
homeschool population, which is
so
another 30-something thousand.
But we're talking a large number, and you have said that child grooming is, an important issue to address as it relates to your solutions. You had mentioned that the legislation is, quote, ambiguous and vague, requires clarity. And yet you want authority as well as if A happens, we do B. I don't know how you completely reconcile giving you authority and ability to make some judgment calls while having the specificity, but I'm going to set that aside. So right now we may have up to 150 to 200,000 girls right now being subject to sexual grooming in our public schools. I've been here for 11 years, had my staff do some research. I don't recall a single time anyone from your department alerting my office saying, we have a problem. We have well over 100,000 girls, perhaps, that are being subject to sexual grooming, and the law in the books isn't working for us. Can you point to when you have communicated with my office or anyone else prior to a investigative report coming out in the newspaper saying that this law needed to be changed?
I want to go back and then answer all these questions.
Well, just answer this. Let's start with this one.
No, you asked you
Let's start with the most important one. Can you point to a single time you communicated to my office or anyone else who's been here as long as I have as to this particular statute is vague, it's ambiguous, and our kids are in danger?
Yeah, I would point you to the I can't remember the act number 200, I believe, 948-048. We testified to that bill, to the committee that was in, and we were in support of it and identified that issue at that point.
So the answer is generally no, because you have not rung any bill. You have not rung any bell in this building that this was an issue. This body has taken sexual crimes, child safety, has put that at the highest priority, bipartisan. And if any time you, Secretary, came into this building and said, I have a problem, we have a problem, we need to address this, it would have been addressed. It took a report in a newspaper in order for us to get here today. You know, instead of see something, say something, it sure seems like DPI's is see something, do nothing. And I'm incredibly disappointed that that is a situation we're dealing with today. Thank you.
Well, if I may.
Well, there was, what was the final question, Representative Stephan?
Well, I still didn't get an answer to, can you, maybe I'll take some follow-up. Could you follow up and show the communications that you have had as a department to my office or anyone else, well, at least on this side of the aisle, where you have said that this particular statute is vague and ambiguous and requires being addressed because we have significant 150 to 200,000 girls every single day are possibly being subjected to sexual grooming.
Representative,
that's my question.
Your own research, you said it was assault. If there were 200,000 assault cases that happen in the state of Wisconsin, I don't think we'd have room in prisons. So I think there might be some.
I didn't say assault. I said grooming.
You said 99% of them are grooming?
99% of those who have child sexual abuse have
child sexual abuse is a crime. So we'd have 200,000 people in jail every single day in accordance with your concept here.
You can fight the research, and if, let's say you want to make it any number you want. I asked you a question, and you obviously don't have an answer. And the reality is that you haven't. You haven't rung any bell.
We'll provide you the testimony. And when
of course.
Sure, we will. When I'm talking about the ambiguity versus the X versus X2Y scenario, I'm speaking about reporting when I'm saying that it would be nice if there was a very clear statute around when something is required to be reported to us and law enforcement together so that we were made aware of these issues and could take actions.
If I may, I've been at the department for 23 years, and over that time I've had some different roles, but I would just like to note, and I appreciate the attention to the matter. I don't know if folks here remember, but at one point, not too long ago, the University of Wisconsin, of which the state superintendent, a different one at that time, is on the Board of Regents, and there was a major study done about how 1 in 4 women experience sexual assault. So I do appreciate you bringing forward this issue. I think we all care very deeply about it. In terms of some of the things that we have done over the years, occasionally, you move through, and like with everything, the law doesn't meet the need at the moment because something comes up and you see you need additional legal authority. At one point, there was an educator who had shared a joke that the school district felt was pornographic. This is a while back, but we did update the immoral conduct law at that time to clarify that immoral conduct definitely includes pornography and the sharing of pornography. I think what I would just say is in the last few years, it does seem like there is more and more that's happening with social media and with boundaries. And I think, again, we have a situation where it would be helpful for us to sit down and talk about, well, what do we want to clarify or add into the law, because the law is not always meeting the moment right now. And so I just would add that in. One last thing that I would just say is that within the last couple years, we have updated our administrative code, PI 34, as well, in recognition of the fact that we were seeing some more things. And so we did clarify that for educator preparation programs approved in the state of Wisconsin, you have to do a background check, and that background check has to include a state and federal check within 6 months of admission into the preparation program. That wasn't in there before, but we felt it was just incredibly important to have that extra check in there. And I do want to thank the legislature for approving that rule so that we were able to implement that and then provide the appropriate guidance to our educator preparation programs. Thank you.
I'm going to express some similar concerns because I was in the hearing in the Education Committee last session when you did testify in support of what eventually became Act 200 on sexual misconduct. And I definitely appreciate DPI's position on that. But it is quite remarkable that the immoral conduct law has been in place for so long and has been applicable for so long without any concerns raised about its interpretation until an investigative report is published in the Cap Times. Now we're going to make recommendations on, we need clarity. I'm all for providing clarity. We're going to end up having to work on it, but the fact of the matter is, it's been the acceptable standard for all this time. Representative Sortwell.
Thank you. Your legal counsel, right? You were, okay. But it has been brought up, but I think it was brought up by you. So, on this idea that you're concerned about if you could get overturned by an administrative law judge. Is that the process listed under Chapter 34 that you're referring to of the rules?
No, I believe I think it's 227, but I'd probably defer to Ledge Counsel. I think we make
So I'm reading it right here, PI 34, Chapter 34, where it talks about a request for reinstatement, and it goes through the process. So that appears that you would have to request, you would appeal your revocation. That appears to be the rule.
It is. So you have two things happening all at the same time here. You have PI 34, which is codifying 11531, which is immoral conduct, which spells out when those appeal things. And then you also have a situation where general appeals of due process are handled at the administrative law side, which is in Chapter 227, I believe. I'm getting a head shake. I got something right today. Those things are all true at the same time. We have to codify the law in our administrative rule that governs licensing, and at the same time, anybody who holds a license in accordance with the rest of the statutes in the state of Wisconsin has particular appeal rights, which are spelled out and covered in 227.
Well, according to DPI's website, you have two people that do due process hearings. Who hires those two individuals?
We use the Department of Administration Hearing and Appeals for due process hearings.
Right, and it lists two hearing officers. Who selects those for your department? Because apparently they're assigned to your department, I would guess. I assume there's other due process and other employment law that happens in Wisconsin. So I'm just going off your own website's information.
If you don't mind, could you share the names? Because we do process
Christian
hearing.
Frederick and Sally Peterson, according to your webpage.
I don't know who those people are. I don't think they work at the department.
Hang on a second. I can get you the roster of staff and let you know who those folks are, or if they're DOA hearings and appeals people. So if you give me 1 second, I will use the internets.
In the meantime, while that is being looked at there, you mentioned you have an RFP out there for theoretically updating your website. When did you put that RFP out?
Yeah, thank you. So I've been working on that with our IT folks and some folks in my bureau for a year and a half. So we started with an RFI, a request for information, that went out last year. Just to get a sense of what was, possible, right? Because your system and you've talked with colleagues in other states, but really to get an idea based on what you're looking to have, what's possible and what do, so you get those requests for information back in, opportunity to see some demos, right? And so that helps us write an RFP. So from that request for information, I'd have to get you the dates. It was about a year ago. From that request for information, we developed an RFP. That was work we did over the last probably 8 months. And then, that got published on VendorNet just this last week. And so the bids are due in December 4th, and opportunity for questions in October.
Excuse me a minute. So the actual RFP went out a week ago?
Yes,
That's interesting timing.
It's a months-long process because you have to. We've been working with our agent at the Department of Administration for over a year. There is a lot of work involved in those, right? There's a lot that has to be pulled together, and we started with a request for information, and we can get that request for information for you from over a year
But you
ago.
finally got on your pony a week ago. Do you have an answer for me on the other question?
Yeah, if you check out the heading on the webpage, it says, quote, due process hearings are conducted by the Division of Hearings and Appeals, 5005 University Avenue, Suite 201, Madison, Wisconsin, and the hearing officers you mentioned. Those are DOA,
Hired by DOA.
lawyers, legals.
Okay, thank you. The other question that I had was on this, where is it now? It's been referenced a couple of times, and if I don't ask the question, I'm sure the chairman will at some point. This idea of revocation of the license versus the surrender. You're saying it's permanent if it's a surrender. Where is it in statute or in your issued rules that it is permanent?
It is not in either place. It is a judgment call of the department to build that in as a condition.
Okay, so you put it into, theoretically, you write it into the agreement that you write with the individual.
That's correct. It's part of the terms of the agreement.
Okay, and so being as it's a contract between the department and the individual, alleged counsel, is there anything to prevent those two parties from revisiting that in the future if there's nothing in statute or rules to prevent that from happening?
Terms of contracts and renegotiations are up to the parties of those contracts.
Okay. So your current practice may be that. How do we actually know that that's never occurred? That's always been permanent?
All of the investigations that are concluded are open records. So if you want us to run a query of that, we're happy to. I don't know what else to tell you.
Okay. Thank you.
I think the question is, have you ever made a settlement on a voluntary surrender that was permanent? I'm not going to go for appeal. I'm never getting a license here again to teach. That eventually actually reconsidered that settlement?
Not to our knowledge.
How long have you been doing the voluntary surrender? That's not in statute or code.
I think we'd have to go back and look. I'm just drawing off having been at the department a long time, and I didn't work in this role that whole time. I know we've had surrenders for a significant amount of time, so definitely going back at least the last 3 state superintendents, if not longer.
I think what you're scratching at is when we were new, and I'm using we because it's important that we are a department, right? So we own all the decisions of everything that's been made, ranging back to the first state superintendent. When we were broaching this topic originally to test the authority of whether this could exist, some of those agreements I think were only for a year or for 3 years or a defined period of time with conditions on that reinstatement or the ability to reapply. I think that's what you're getting at. We don't do that anymore. Dr. Underly does not use that practice.
Can I follow up
on that? Quickly.
Yeah, so thank you, Madam Chair. Just following up on what you said about it not being in statute or rule, I think we can ask Ledge Counsel, but there is a process for settlements of these investigations.
But there's not something specifically in statute or in code other than the settlement piece that gives you the authority to do those voluntary surrenders. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. And it's contemplated in kind of like other functions of government. I want to correct one thing I said. What I was saying about lifetime is specific to grooming. We do have instances where we have issues where educators have had mental health challenges, educators have been caught for OWI, and we do create circumstances where they can remedy their license violations. So I'm speaking specifically on the lifetime side to grooming patterns, behaviors, sexual assault.
So under the leadership of Dr. Underly, the current sort of agreement and policy amongst the department is if we're going to do voluntary surrenders for immoral conduct, it's going to be a lifetime agreement in the settlement that you're not coming back. That could change under a future superintendent?
Yes, yeah, I think that's an accurate statement.
Okay, so for an agency that would like more clarity on things, maybe we should look at clarifying the circumstances under which we allow voluntary surrender and maybe get that into statute or law.
I think we would be amenable to working with you on a number of things, as long as it does not limit or get in the way of us getting bad teachers out of classrooms.
Agree. Representative Gustafson.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I didn't know if I was going to be able to talk today. A lot of the questions I already had seem to be already kind of getting answered, especially around the process of the voluntary surrendering. And actually, I actually was able to acquire one of these agreements. And kind of based off of what was kind of going back and forth is really the question that I wanted to answer was, okay, today we know it's going to be a lifetime, essentially, agreement, but going forward, let's say administrations change, can that contract be revisited and renegotiated? So I think that's a pretty important thing that we as a body here can look at, especially in the form of codifying that. But one thing I do want to go back to was the scenario that you had given about a student being text messaged by a teacher and what is considered immoral conduct versus obviously what may seem as a gesture of ensuring the students getting to class. Do you have from DPI your own policy that you've pushed down to school districts as kind of a framework of what is the proper form of communication? Is there a protocol, especially which ways to contact a student?
Yeah.
The last part, go ahead.
Well, one of our prior attorneys had worked with the Wisconsin Association of School Boards and developed a draft model policy around appropriate professional boundaries and use of communications, and that does reside on our website. We've made that available. Obviously, it's up to a school district whether or not they want to adopt that.
And to answer your question about evaluation of cases, when we're looking at the volume of communications, we use a case-by-case basis, to be very honest with you, because we take very extreme care to evaluate all the facts in the pattern right now, because we know we are at the edge of our authority, and we have to make smart decisions to not open a precedent or a door that allows other people to continue to do boundary violation behavior.
Do you think that it's appropriate that it is the teacher who's following up, let's say if it's a truancy issue or whatever it may be? Do you believe it's the teacher's authority to be following through on that, or the school district, someone in the administration, to be having that line of communication with the student?
I think it's a case-by-case basis inside of districts. And what you will also find in the model policy that we were talking about is most districts, if not all districts, have some sort of policy around the types of communication and the methods of communication, so that the district can subsequently capture all communication through whatever IT solution they're using. So if it's as simple as like an educator or the primary person who sees a kid in an elementary grade saying, hey, you going to make it to school tomorrow, through the district-sponsored app, so that all that communication is documented and able to be pulled, that seems reasonable in a district of 4 to 1,000 kids, where you don't have a large administrative office that is doing truancy runs, that has the level of student support services that a large district would have to be able to follow up and triage casework.
Okay. And then bouncing just back again to the voluntary surrendering. And has there ever been a case where you have seen where you've wanted to come back, especially if someone has signed the agreement to voluntary surrender? Let's say there was a criminal investigation as well that was partnered with it that then was dismissed. Is there the opportunity that DPI would say, well, okay, nothing came out of this, even though you signed this agreement? Are you then more inclined to have that conversation to reconsider the contract?
We're kind of chuckling up here because those are not a frequent thing. But we do have folks that are that exact fact pattern that write to us, some write to you, and bounce back at us, and our answer is no. I mean, when we've seen enough that we've triggered a voluntary surrender that's lifetime, this administration under Dr. Underly believes that means you are done in all settings around kids.
Yeah, and when you document that in the system, you said, I think we can actually go and look up the status. Does it tell us why? besides voluntary surrender?
At this point, it doesn't, and there is some challenge and limitation to what our data system can construct. I think we are talking internally a little bit about can we do something to satisfy some of the asks that we've received around creating some sort of database that manually pulls people out and catalogs them by name and incident. But right now, the limitations of our IT system are we get a handful of tags, and it's very expensive to modify them.
Yeah, this is again why we had done the request for information followed by the request for proposal, because our system is pretty old at this point, right? If you think of IT, we procured this system back in 2012 and it went live in 2014. And the company was bought out a few times along the way here. And so we have a platform that a lot of people don't use anymore called Versa Regulation. It's how shall I put this? It's pretty rigid, right? It was built with a lot of rules, and that and so we're working with our vendor. It's not possible for our system to do some things, and we want to be more flexible, right? Things come up, we want to be able to portray and show some more detail on things, to pull some different reports, to give people different dashboards, like that. Though all of those things would be helpful and might allow us to do something. Absent that, with a workaround, like what workaround can we manually do to provide the information that everyone wants to see? But yes, you can look people up and you can see their license status, including surrendered, revoked, expired, or invalid.
Just to add just a little more on top of that, Representative, to clarify it, while it is not on our system, a school district that is this person is, or a place where this person is trying to get a license, they access the NASDAQ system, and they do see the reasons there. It doesn't just say that a license is surrendered. It has more fulsome details. So if someone leaves the state and goes to another state and tries to get a teaching license in that state, they are going to see license surrendered in Wisconsin for immoral conduct, along with a brief descriptor of what happened. So,
is that the same in the reverse then, where if someone's coming into our state, you'll
Correct.
also see, obviously some sort of conduct,
Right.
Misconduct,
and that is used in all 50 states in the District of Columbia and Guam, interestingly enough.
And I'll give you an example of, like, it's all fitting the pattern that you're asking questions about. We have had an educator who voluntarily surrendered, was engaged in a law enforcement investigation. They determined that they did not have enough information to prosecute that person. This person went to the state of Illinois, tried to get a teacher license, got popped in the NASDAQ, said, oh, dang, and then has come back to Wisconsin and has been banging on every door in the world to get their voluntary surrender for lifetime pulled back. We're not moving.
and then school districts have that access as well.
School districts don't have NASDAQ. They have access to our system.
So the access to the system is limited because there's very sensitive information in there to the 50 states and the specific to the states, each state's laws about what can be shared, right? So having said that, there's the licensing agencies have access to this. School districts do not.
So if they're doing a hiring process and they want to check essentially that national system, they don't have access, like a school board if they're going to hire a teacher.
School boards are not allowed to hire people who don't, and to work who don't have a license. So the license process takes care of that.
It does kind of, though, Representative, it does revisit one of the things that we made a recommendation around reporting on, because we're talking about licensed entities. And there are unlicensed people in school districts. In other words, they don't need to have a license to do what they're doing, whether that's, communications person, I'm throwing my own self on the spit here a little bit, or someone that's a paraprofessional in a non-special ed or Title I setting. Those people are not required legally to have licenses. And so I think one of the recommendations we would like to continue to push with you is extend the reporting to cover all staff and all settings, because that would then capture the ability for anybody who is hiring to not just be using a background check, but also be using the immoral conduct statute and this administration, at least, pursuit of grooming to make sure they're not putting the wrong people in classes.
So I would say it's not just, it's both about not putting certain people in classes, but also making sure as another safety mechanism that because there is something there that a licensing agency is given, even if it's just a background check and all that we do as part of that, there's something then that an action then can then be taken if something happens, and then we can then put those people into this database so that they can't go work somewhere else. Because right now, for example, if you're a regular education paraprofessional in a public school, you're not required to get a license. Special education paraprofessionals are. So something happens. We don't have a way to take action on that person. They don't hold a license. Doesn't rise to the level of a criminal matter. So they move on. And maybe they go work somewhere else in Wisconsin, or maybe they go work in another state because there's nothing to flag. Now, a lot of states have different licensing laws, but one could argue that we could do a bit more on ensuring that everybody who's in our schools has to have some kind of something from the Department of Public Instruction, so we can do all of those things and check. So, for example, a special education paraprofessional, when they go to get licensed, they simply need to be over 18, right? Graduated from high school. And then they apply, and we do all of those things that I talked about earlier.
And I think the other challenge, and we've seen a few cases of this, also exist in the private school space, because you are not required to have a license. So you can float around between systems, between schools, when you are operating on the fringes. And as you heard law enforcement say, if these cases are challenging, they're not popping on our criminal background check because they're never being charged, they're never being prosecuted, and they can hop between schools.
So, and just to close, I'm not even going to ask, obviously as you're pursuing, something as large as an overhaul of your system, obviously in my other capacity as the tech rep, I'm going to want to know about what you're working on here, like sooner than later.
So the bid is available on VendorNet, and I'm based. Anybody can look at it. It'll be available, I think, until it closes on December 4th. So feel free to reach out to DOA, or we can provide you the link as well. I will caution that, because I've been cautioned by the Department of Administration, that I can't talk about it other than to say it's available. But definitely feel free to look at that. I wish I could say I'd love to have conversations, but I'm not allowed to outside of what's been posted. But you could also request the RFI that we put out earlier, so you could see those as well. So you could see the evolution from the request for information to the request for proposal.
And the types of things that we're valuing and what that system would do for users and the department.
Would that new system make everything more transparent to the public?
The answer would be yes, and it will make a vast difference in the user experience of our license holders of being able to interact with the department.
So, if you get your new system, and we look up a teacher license status, currently we see expired, active, revoked, voluntarily surrendered. Are those the four options?
Yeah, we are unable.
Pending?
Oh,
Is pending one? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, there's things that we can't do with our current system. I can't show, for example, if there's been some kind of gap for some reason, right? Let's say someone did have an operating while intoxicated, and they were teaching driver's education. That's an automatic revocation under our law. They come back. We can't say why. We can't show the detail. We can't provide maybe what people would like to see, which would be like, well, was it for immoral conduct? Was it for incompetence? Was it because they had something happen in another state?
That's remarkable.
Yeah.
It's remarkable. And in 2025, as a former database administrator in the early 2000s, working with simple table technology underneath a simple graphic user interface, that you can't show another field in a table. It's remarkable because the Wisconsin Department of Safety and Professional Services can show you the reason for a license revocation for anyone, and they are multiple pages long, such as Mr. LaPointe, who lost his license for tattooing and piercing, or we've got several manicurists here in multiple pages of explanations of why the manicure. It's easier for me as a member of the public to find out why a cosmetologist lost their license and why it was revoked than it is for me to find out why a teacher license was revoked or voluntarily surrendered. I know you can do open records requests. I know that. But this is anybody else. So why is it so hard for us to find out critical safety information, general public, about the status of a teacher's license and why it may have been surrendered or revoked? I don't buy that it's system limitation. I just don't, because I've been working in this field for a long time, and I know that there's a way to do it. On the national database, is it free to all agencies who use it?
It's a membership charge.
There's a membership charge. Where does the data come from?
So all state education agencies that participate in NASDAQ pay a membership fee as part of that, and then also commit to certain obligations as part of this
So
work.
there are definitely state agencies that don't participate?
An agency could choose not to participate, none have.
And then if an agency is participating, are they inputting all data all the time? Can you be sure of that? Or maybe it's not perfect?
It depends on so I'm not an expert on every state education agency's technical systems, but I can say that some have like daily and nightly uploads, right, where they're connecting in. For ours, our system's a little older, but we do get those in on a regular basis. That gets inputted, and then we manually go through it to see what's matching in the system. Knowing that we can get it, I'm pretty sure that most states who have more advanced systems than ours do, some states are still exploring moving to an electronic licensing system. Not every state has one. So I can't speak to how every state is, how their systems are syncing, but I can say that we've all committed as part of the membership. It's an agreement you sign. And we have to verify the information that gets put in there. So that information gets manually put in every time something happens. When we have a revocation that we're doing, or a surrender, or if we're denying a license on a background because the license applications come in for immoral conduct, that can happen as well.
To your points about the IT system, we don't own the actual table fields. So if you want to get into the wonky land here, we purchased a product that was used across many different states that had a consistent structure inside of it, and we are making hot fixes to the structure because the way the database was stood up did not allow for the type of modification that you'd probably be familiar with. And we don't have programmers probably like yourself at our disposal to be able to pull the whole framework of the platform down, reissue it with modifications, and regularly support it. So it's a real limitation.
We're going to give our friends over here a chance to talk today. Representative Hong.
Thank you, Chairwoman. So I would like to make crystal clear, and I think I could speak for everyone here, that the well-being of all children in our state and beyond are of utmost importance. And what I have not been hearing today is what this body is going to do, especially those of us as lawmakers, to put in preventative measures and stop any child from becoming a victim of abuse in schools or in the home. We've heard that there could be better statutory language, clearer definitions, more authority to be able to take action. I'm wondering if you could expand on what would be adequate resources, what sort of policy changes beyond what we've discussed here, and the technical changes the department would like to see or have maybe already made requests for through budget or recommended legislative changes.
Yeah, I mean, I think you ticked a bunch of them. One that I want to make sure just staying consistent, it's in the testimony too. There is a reporting challenge. We've talked about it, licensed, unlicensed. Also, if you have a definition of grooming, it gets a lot easier for districts to realize, hey, I have to report this to the department, right? So I think don't miss that. That's a big one. It's meaningful. Right now, the way our licensing fees function, we collect revenues, and we are only allowed to expend 90% of them. Last session, we asked the Joint Finance Committee, and they approved of our ability to spend 100% of those to serve people. We do use licensing fees to, on the majority, support our staff that do this work, but our slashing of $1 million per fiscal year in GPR does impact some of the training and technical assistance. We do pay for folks to do NASDAQ and additional training out of our general purpose revenue. So as long as that massive cut to our budget line continues to be in place, that will hamper our ability to continue to keep up with general practices of other states around identifying grooming and making sure that we're taking care of kids. And then, we would love to come back to you when the RFP closes, because we don't want to be disingenuous about how much an IT system upgrade costs. We don't want to be hoodwinked by vendors. I'll just tell you that right now. There's a lot of them that when they saw the RFI, they thought, hey, let's just go over there and do some sort of less than competitive procurement. And we want to know value per dollar, how much these systems actually cost, so that we don't end up drawing down additional resources that the state values. And we do too, as folks that want to protect taxpayer dollars.
Thank you. I have a question about substitute teaching licensing, if you're willing to. Are those the processes to acquire one available online?
Yes, there's a long-term substitute license and two ways to acquire a 3-year short-term substitute license.
Does that information online include what could be disqualifying to obtain a license, a substitute teaching license?
The conditions in terms of background as to what would be disqualifying would apply to any license. We do have information on our background check portion of our webpage that talks about what we check, and it lists out all the things that I mentioned earlier. We talk about what you're going to have to do. There's a fingerprint decision tree to help people navigate it if they need to submit fingerprints. And then, basically, we give people also the conduct and competency in advance, so they can see the questions they'll have to be answering. If that's helpful. Is that what you're asking?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Just that information is clearly laid out and available and transparent. Mm-hmm. Okay. And what happens when a license expires? Can you talk a little bit more about I guess I'm assuming a renewal process, but...
It depends on the license, and the only reason I say that is because lifetime licenses are special in state law. And so if an individual who holds a lifetime license does not complete their background check and work history within every 5 years, and we do send people notifications on that to make sure to remind them, what will happen is we, under the law, it gives them an additional 6 months. And so we send them a notice saying, hey, let's say it was expiring June 30th, you have until December 31st, or your lifetime license will become invalid. And when that happens, they'll have to, if they want a license after that, it will return to a provisional or tier 2 status, because our licensing is in tiers, right? A full license is tier 2, a lifetime is tier 3, another version of the lifetime is tier 4, which is the national board certification or master educator process. Every other the provisional licenses are term licenses, right? Mm-hmm. They're 3-year licenses, and if you don't have 6 semesters of experience in certain settings that are laid out in the law, then you can renew your provisional license. If you do have those 6 semesters of successful teaching experience, you can advance it to the lifetime. Most of the licenses that we offer at the tier 1, where you haven't completed a prep program, essentially, right? There's different versions of those kinds of licenses, everything from a special education paraprofessional to a short-term sub, to a vocational experience-based license, and others. Those have varying years associated with them, and along with the renewal requirements are also laid out in the law.
Okay. So those renewal requirements are laid out in the law.
And every application, regardless of whether you're renewing it or not, has a background check process with it. Every single one. So when you come through our door, whoever you are, and you're applying for any license, you're going to get first put into this queue for background. If that's completed successfully, after we go through everything I mentioned earlier, all those things we check, then you move into the application process. So that, but the processing of your actual application, because we clear the background first, because we're looking to ensure that it is not possible for a mistake to be made and someone to process an application while there is an issue on the background. So no one is allowed to process an application until it's been cleared by the background part of our work.
Okay.
And the background also includes the conduct and competency that I've referenced a couple of times, where we ask probing questions of, have you been charged or dismissed for particular crimes that would disqualify you from becoming a teacher? And if they say yes, we then ask them for additional information to make sure that they should be allowed to have a license. If they say no, and they in fact have, and that pops on a background check, that is an immediate disqualification, and so we deny the license at that point.
Okay. So I guess if there's an individual, there was allegations of child abuse, and there was law enforcement that made recommendations on it based on the process, especially the comprehensive background checks that somebody who has a expired substitute teaching license would likely not choose to renew, or would likely not be able to receive a renewal of that license.
Correct.
Okay.
I want to move on to Representative Baer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tom, you mentioned in your responses to both Rep. Steffen and Rep. Gustafson about differences between public and private schools, and I'd like to dive a little bit more into that. There's obviously the difference in who's licensed and who's not in the settings, a requirement for who's licensed and who's not. There's differences in open records requests, and I think I heard you say earlier that a revocation wouldn't prevent someone from teaching at a private school once revoked if private school decides that that's okay. And I think first I'd like to ask Ledge Counsel, is that correct interpretation? If someone had a lifetime revocation as a licensed educator, they could still be hired as an educator at a private school that is not required to have licensed educators.
Yeah, state law doesn't place any requirements on licensure for private school teachers,
Okay.
so unless something in that private school's own policies prohibit that, there's nothing to do.
So that's over 100,000 students that are at risk who we're certainly not taking care of at the moment. I think, Jennifer, you might have the quote of the day with the law doesn't meet the moment. I would say that is a law not meeting the moment and scope of a problem, and something that we should be absolutely focused on. So can you dive a little into the details, this private-public distinction?
Yeah, you got a bunch of it from Ledge Counsel at the top. I think the other couple of pieces that I would want to elevate and make sure you understood, if you look at how 948.098 is constructed, it is indifferent to the school model. If you look at how 115.31, the immoral conduct statute, is constructed, it is assuming that you are some sort of public entity, whether it's a school or a charter school. And so there is a little bit of a hole there if you have some sort of immoral conduct. When you're looking at 115.31.3, which is the administrator reporting duties, you could have a situation where a private school made a determination that this was really not good. We investigated it. We dismissed the staff person. No one would know. It would exist locally, especially around some of these grooming violations, because, as you heard from Chief Patton, there is not a strong law enforcement aspect to this that works like immoral conduct. So there's a gap there. It's significant. Yeah. And on the open records side of the house, school districts are subject, private schools are not subject to open records.
Right. And similar to things that you all do, you're subject to open records, and those would not be.
I apologize. Jennifer just reminded me they actually are, private schools are required to report to us. But we don't have any authority to make sure that that's happening, or, Thank you, Jennifer.
Right, okay. Thank you for that, clarifying that. I mean, it's something I think we have to add to the to-do list here.
I also appreciate the question. Thank you. Representative Sortwell, you had a question for Ledge Counsel?
Yeah, I was just wondering, because it's been referenced once or twice, if we could go over kind of the process for the appeal of a license that's been revoked or whatever, because it seems like because I'm looking at the language, and the language seems to align pretty well in Chapter 31 of the rules. Seems to align pretty well with what's being described about there being an ALJ, which is referred to as a hearing officer in that. But, DPI is also referencing that there's another appeals process apparently with an ALJ. So apparently there's a hearing officer in both. I was wondering if we could get a summary of all of that.
Yeah, so what I'm understanding is, or my understanding of the way this currently works is Chapter PI 34 goes through what the Department of Public Instruction's process is for when they get complaints and their initial determination of whether a person's license can be revoked. Once that final decision, assuming there's a hearing, right, we don't have any kind of agreements or settlements outside of it, it results in a final determination by the state superintendent. And I believe at that point that decision can be appealed through Chapter 227 and through an administrative appeals process. And that is more squarely in DOA, to my understanding, though I will admit I'm not an expert on how that works. And then the final determination through that administrative secondary appeal can then be appealed to district court.
So Chapter 34, 104 relating to PI 34, 1.04, request for reinstatement, which then goes down into the conduct of the hearing related to a hearing officer and related to how all the processes of that, even though that's a request for reinstatement, that is separate from a different request for reinstatement under DOA?
So the request would have to originate, and I'm looking at them because they might have a little more on the ground experience, but the requests should always originate in DPI, and then once they've worked through the DPI process, then they go to DOA. These requests for reinstatement or the revocation process, those both have to start in the Department of Public Instruction.
Okay, so you would go through the initial investigation.
Mm-hmm.
They would revoke because they think it's worth revoking, and then you would have to go through a hearing theoretically at the department and settle that. And if you're not reinstated, then you would have yet another appeal after that, and that would be to DOA.
And I also think there's kind of two separate buckets, right? The revocation is is separated out from the reinstatement, even though the reinstatement is inside.
Yeah, that's right. You got it.
The way that the chapter is structured, because reinstatement is kind of in between the different processes, they might be confusing, but
I think another way to think about it, maybe to help. So you've been revoked. You know you've been revoked, and now you're seeking your license back. You're reinstating. Versus, I don't agree with the decision at Wool to revoke, and so I'm going to go and appeal that because I don't think I should have been revoked in the first place.
And I think, Representative, I know this gets a little weird, but the way the chapter is laid out, I think you're thinking that there is some sort of logical connection between 34-104 and 34-105. Mm-hmm. In reality, it's kind of like this is just a different section. Like they don't actually impact each other like I think your logic is trying to draw. And I'm not trying to be rude. I know we've had some back and forth. That's just kind of how it sits in the organization. They're not nested underneath each other. They're describing separate processes.
Okay. The other question I had for Village Council was, it was referenced by DPI earlier about this issue of, you could be in the middle of an investigation, and then because they have a license, or they had a pending license or something, and then they bump down to a position that no longer requires a license, and therefore the investigation, at least at the DPI level, ends, if I understood that correctly. But theoretically, if that was happening at a school, and they're now in a position that doesn't require the license, so they're no longer pursuing that license, and there was obviously a significant suspicion of that they started this, wouldn't that possibly be a violation of sub B under immoral conduct for them to actually put them into a lower position, into another position to avoid that investigation?
Representative, we wouldn't end an investigation until the license is gone. What I was saying is that if they moved into an unlicensed position, the license doesn't matter anymore. Does that make sense? So if we know there's wrongdoing and we're chasing it, and the district, the employing entity, district, private school, whoever it is, removes them from a licensed position, we're not going to stop chasing to remove the license, but there is no longer a legal requirement for that person to have the license.
Okay, I appreciate that. So DPI continues to pursue that, so that's good. What about the local school level? Is with that theory, if they're, because they know that they might be dealing with an issue related to a license, if they would then move them to a non-licensed position, wouldn't that possibly be a violation of sub B under immoral conduct by not the person who may have done the initial wrong, but maybe the school administrator?
So that portion of the moral conduct definition is specific to assisting an employee, contractor, or agent finding another job if the person assisting them believes that they've committed a sex offense. So it's more narrow. It's not, we believe this person committed immoral conduct, but we believe they committed a sex offense, which is a higher bar. And also there's kind of a caveat to that if that information has been reported to law enforcement. So if law enforcement, it's been reported to law enforcement, you can assist no matter what. Mm-hmm. But if it's something less than a sex offense, then it doesn't fall into that subsection anyways.
Right, but they don't have to be convicted of a sex offense. It's under that section, it's a reasonable suspicion.
Yes.
Thank you.
I wanted to go back to some of the transparency stuff we were talking about. Not being able to put the field on the webpage, et cetera, et cetera. DPI, Dr. Underley has stated publicly all of this information is available via open records. Sometimes there are complications with things that might be contained inside a personnel file based on other laws that protect certain things, or it may take more time to get that information. I'd like to understand when DPI is doing an investigation, or when a local school district, maybe Ledge Council might have to weigh in on this, if there's an investigation report, documents related to an investigation, are those inside a personnel file or are they separate?
Yeah, we generally are consuming what would constitute a personnel file, because it's an investigation of their employment, which the local district construes as a personnel file, which again is that challenge that we're looking internally to see if there are some things that we could do, but there are some limitations, and the other piece is our lack of subpoena authority too, to be able to get and know that what we have is complete and accurate. So we're relying off of what is voluntarily provided to us, normally in a collegial way, but when you're dealing with complex personnel issues, it can get dicey. And so you're raising a very valid question that we are looking internally at, is like, what is the manual amount of labor that would be required? What could we possibly do? What information could we display in a way that is sort of like, here's the list of people with the information that we know. Jennifer?
Yeah, I just wanted to add in, because obviously I talked to my colleagues in other parts of the country, and a number of states have, another number of state education agencies do have subpoena power. So I didn't want you to think it was something unusual we were asking for. So we can definitely share that information back with you.
I think as we talk about, the public's concern about transparency on why a person's license was revoked or voluntarily surrendered, we need to address this problem so that people can understand if their child is safe or not in a circumstance. If I'm working at the local YMCA and I want to hire somebody and they come in and, I used to be a teacher, I go to DPI, they voluntarily surrendered their license. Well, maybe that guy says, I decided I didn't want to work in education anymore, and and there was no criminal conviction and a background check, and I don't really have any way of knowing why it was voluntarily surrendered. It may have been immoral conduct. We need prospective employers, organizations, other instances where children are involved that are not in a school setting to be able to have access to reasons why someone voluntarily surrendered their license or reasons why it was revoked. Just like just like is offered through DISPUS.
Before you go, I think that is a reasonable request, and we are running it down to see what is possible, and I do think we would be able to share something back with the committee in a timely way.
And if there's something we need to do, we'll put that on the list. Okay?
I mean, it's honestly, just to, and I'm not, I promise you I'm not normally this guy, it is human power. It is employees, because we're pulling them away from processing applications and chasing investigations to do something like this. So that is part of the constraint that we're facing, is just straight capacity in that area.
Okay, I'm going to move on to Representative Cruz. It's great to hear from you.
I'm not going to be able to ask questions either.
I'm just going in order, everyone.
I know.
No favoritism here.
That was a good segue, though, because the word I wrote down is capacity and oversight. So thank you for that. Just trying to wrap my brain around the totality of all of the testimony we've heard. Thank you for your work on this very serious issue. Fortunately, I know all about licensure since I am a licensed teacher. So you're saved from those questions, from me anyways. But I just walking through public potential limitations in your ability to oversee the system as a whole. So bear with me. So you receive as DPI complaints, and those are referred to the Office of Legal Services. So you intake these complaints, or they intake these complaints. Employees are notified of their due process. An investigation is launched. That's posted on the website. Under licensure lookup. Okay, I'm with you. And then whatever comes of that investigation is then, should some wrongdoing occur and a license is revoked, that ends up on a national register. So I'm just walking down a path of the difference between public schools and private and voucher schools, and the requirements to be licensed. So our private and voucher school staff subject to the same mandatory reporting laws, and I know this answer, but I just want to hear it from you. The same as public school educators. So is everybody subject to mandatory required reporting?
Mandatory reporting, yes.
Okay. And so when somebody is reported, DPI has the authority to investigate those who are licensed. And I'm trying not to conflate criminal investigations either, because that's separate from what you investigate. So maybe you could explain that as well. Before I ask my next question.
Actually, just let me start with one in terms of the mandatory reporting.
Okay.
So mandatory reporting is for child protective services, for abuse, and so the reporting requirements for school districts, actually it's for educational agencies under the law, and educational agencies include school districts, cooperative educational service agencies, state correctional institutions, juvenile correctional facilities, residential care centers for children and youth, Wisconsin Center for the Blind and Visually Impaired, the Wisconsin Educational Services for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, I'm almost done, the Mendota Mental Health Institute, the Winnebago Mental Health Institute, a state center for the developmentally disabled, a private school or a private nonprofit, nonsectarian agency under contract with a school board. All of those are educational agencies, and the administrator of an educational agency is supposed to report to us. However, we can only take action on licenses. And most of these educational agencies I mentioned may not have many licensed people or any licensed people in some instances. And so, yes, there's a responsibility. Awareness of that responsibility I can't speak to. I mean, obviously we know school districts know about it because we talk to them about it, and it's listed in other places for these other educational agencies. But I would have to tell you that because of the way in which things flow, we receive many things because it's breaking news, right? It's breaking news to the district, it's breaking news across the board, and so we want to make sure we're putting people under investigation as absolutely quickly as possible when we see something. Districts do give us reports. Those go quite quickly, and we move those through. But I think Tom wants to say something, so I'll stop talking.
No, you're good. It was good. It's good information. Representative, I think the other thing, I've told you about some of the DPI limitations, but there are real limitations for our other partner agencies in this work too. One of the reasons that folks get stuck in the investigation stage for as long as they do is that there is often a criminal case pending, and we are using deference to that criminal case before we make a final disposition of the license case. And we are in regular contact with our law enforcement partners. It doesn't matter how the reference comes in, whether it's private, public, whatever. And we hear that often from them is like, hey, we're working on this, but we have complications, we have challenges. So I just don't want you to think it's just DPI. We need a holistic system approach to these things. I would include counties on there too in terms of CPS and mandatory reporting. We know districts are one of, if not the top reporters in terms of volume through the child welfare system. And many of those reports are screened out immediately, in other words, with no action, no documentation. And a lot of that is due to just incomplete information or a false lead, like couldn't track down a lead that were able to answer questions. And so that mandatory reporting thing that you're hammering on is critical, but it's not going to solve the problem unless we have some real changes in terms of how we're resourcing those systems.
Could you, the follow-up to that, could you talk about staffing, the staffing that you do have dedicated to investigating these complaints?
Yeah, so our Office of Legal Services has multiple attorneys, and then we have 1.5 dedicated investigators, although one of the investigators has licensing work and investigation work in a sort of split position. And so that's our outlie right now, and we have upped the amount of staff that we have engaged in processes around license revocation over time in order to deal with the volume that is coming through the door. Jennifer?
Yeah, I'll just add on. So in my bureau, we do licensing. We do a different kind of revocation in my bureau. It's not for immoral conduct or incompetence, but state statute also requires us to revoke for unpaid taxes. So the Department of Revenue, every day we have data going back and forth to say if there's anybody we need to revoke or clear based on what the Department of Revenue is telling us. We handle those and child welfare as well with, yes, thank you. I will say that we have, just for your reference, because all of this is part of a larger whole, right? All that we're doing to keep children safe as part of the background check processes that I mentioned earlier and everything else. We have, on average, the 5-year average is about 45,000 applications a year, about 50,000 inquiries. Then on top of that, we're doing a few other things, including these revocations. I have 11 full-time staff. I have 2 section leaders who work with me, and then I have 11 LTEs, 4 of whom are part-time. So just to kind of give you a sense of like volume of work and what we do.
So like on average for your 1.5 staff investigating, what's the average caseload?
I think it sort of depends. We do see some ebb and flow. Jennifer, do you know offhand what our...
I don't know. We can get you that. We've had more. Frankly, I don't know if that's because people are forthcoming more or because we're just doing a better job of making sure people know where to go to get those reports into us from all corners. But we have had an uptick because we have every 2 weeks multiple reports that we have to go through, investigation reports.
And I will say, Representative Cruz, this will make logical sense, but I need to say it out loud. The ebb and flow I speak of relates to the calendar year of school as well. So when we're out, we're able to do some work to clear and make sure that we're moving. When we're in, we're taking a lot of incoming. And so it does, if I give you, we'll give you some averages and show you throughout the calendar year what that balance looks like so that you have an understanding. And those investigators, to just make sure you understand what they're doing, they are doing the direct follow-up with our partner agencies to say, hey, where is this law enforcement case at? school district, can I have the rest of this personnel file? Are you completed with your investigation? If there are victims involved, it is making sure that all the documentations are in place for gathering subpoenas if they're willing to testify, lining up all that work. So it's a kind of a weird mashup of being an investigator as you would traditionally think about it in a license sense, and then just somebody who is dogged about making sure that we have the best information and the most current information all the time. And they're amazing human beings.
Thank you for that. I'd also be interested in seeing staffing levels of DPI over time. So as there's been an uptick in reports of misconduct or cases associated with grooming, what is the staffing level or ability to deal with that increased volume? If you have, I'm sure you have data on that. So if you could provide that data as well.
And I think the big background in our licensing staffing area, and this touches the investigators as well, is that when we moved to the lifetime licensure system, the legislature contemplated that there would be a significant decrease in work and cut the ability for us to staff that area of the agency. And I'm not casting blame, I'm telling you the facts of what happened. So we lost position authority in this area that was directly funded and allowed us to staff, and we have moved around resources is because, as you've heard me say several times, Dr. Underly views this as a massive priority in the agency, so have passed state superintendents to make sure that there were enough humans. But it was a loss of capacity that happened at that moment, and again, it was because, and I'm just going to, you know me, I'm going to be transparent. When the legislature moved to lifetime license, they said, okay, department, you're not doing portfolio reviews in a regular cycle. You probably need less humans. I don't think anybody at that moment in time contemplated how fast technology would take off and how much interaction staff and students would be having in this area. And so we're dedicating agency resources to keep people safe, fill in the gap, because it's the right thing to do, and we know we have to do it. But it's a pinch, right? We're running a lean government.
Lifetime licensure.
Is this the last question?
I'm trying. I've waited so long. Okay, so maybe in conclusion, just trying to wrap my head around things that would be helpful to DPI and to ensuring the safety of all of our kids. What I heard is statutory definitions, having clarity. I heard that from you. I also heard that from law enforcement. Staff funding related to IT upgrades and staffing would be helpful. And then the reporting challenges. So there's people, you can oversee those who have been licensed, and somebody is found guilty of wrongdoing, license is revoked.
Is there a question in there, Representative?
That is flagged. Would it also be helpful to have uniform licensure requirements for all educators across both sectors, public and private, in order to ensure the safety of kids?
The licensing system would up the amount of guarantee that we could make that they were not someone who has done something terrible in the past. The other thing I do want to just re-note, and again, it's in the written testimony, annual training is a critical component of some of this work. We annually train on mandatory reporting. If we got to a place where we were working together to better define and outline grooming patterns and boundary violations, you could slide this in the same way that we do suicide prevention annual training, where it's a course that educators are reminded of frequently so that they understand, and it allows us to keep pace so that we are, I'm going to steal Jennifer's lovely term, meeting the moment over time by providing up-to-date training for educators annually. Yes, I'm sorry, and Jennifer has wisely noted to me some sort of subpoena authority so that we can make sure we have valid information.
This is all in your testimony, right?
Yep, and required board policies on grooming as well,
Okay.
and code of ethics.
We got a great solid list going that we've all repeated a number of times. I would like to point out, in your 2025, 2027 budget request, I see a request for 5 GPR FTE and 3 program revenue FTE. Nothing specific at all in the request for anything related to investigations of sexual misconduct or immoral conduct.
As I've pointed out, and I'm not trying to be combative, the effort around modernizing our licensing system would allow us to reposition resources. So if you look in the IT modernization section of the 25-27 budget, you will see a note that dictates or asks for some flexible money for us to run IT system improvements, one of them being licensing, which would allow us to, instead of doing direct service of I can't figure out how to get ELO to put my contact information in, to be on the back end of doing auditing and requirements in that space.
I think if it had been explained to the legislative body that you had an urgency, or Dr. Underly claims she has an urgency to address this need for resources and investigators, that they probably would have responded to that. But I don't see that urgency expressed in the budget request
We would have loved to come before the Joint Committee on Finance, but our invitation got lost in the mail.
They take emails.
Well, we communicated.
I have a. I'm curious if Dr. Underly would come in person for that. I wanted to go back to this concern about voluntary surrender and settlements, and do people ever come back saying, you know, I want to be able to get my license reinstated even though I agreed in my settlement that it would be forever revoked. I think there may have been an inference in one of the Cap Times articles recently that they weren't all lifetime, and that some were like, maybe there was some negotiations to resettle, or it wasn't necessarily true that they were all lifetime revocations. And I'm just curious, how often, like, does anyone come to you and say, oh my God, I know I said it's for a lifetime, but now I want to change my mind? And I know Representative Cruz brought up a more vague story, but I know she's been working hard at trying to help a teacher who was in this position, gave up their license and now wants it back. I have email from you from earlier this session that this person needed help, wants help getting their license reinstated. I know your office reached out to Senator Wangard that you're trying to help a teacher get their license reinstated that was revoked. I mean, is that often that happens?
Well,
or was it voluntarily surrendered?
It would be helpful to know who, because there's different kinds of revocations. So if someone is revoked because they didn't pay their taxes, right, where we notify the employer, we notify the individual, and they're not allowed.
It's Timothy William Schmidt.
Okay, we can look that person up.
Do you know offhand why the license was revoked or voluntarily surrendered?
I do not. I have to look in our system. I apologize.
I believe it was allegations of child abuse.
It was allegations of child abuse, and you don't know if there was a conviction or not?
I believe that local law enforcement ended up clearing the individual or not going all the way to a charge. I'm speaking off of conjecture because I don't have the law enforcement case in front of me, so I don't know what standard they were unable to meet. But the person did voluntarily surrender due to those conditions. Yeah, Representative.
I can jump in since it was Mark. So my staff is assisting. Thank you. So my staff is assisting. It was, off the top of my head, a due process issue. So we were helping, and he's a constituent, helping him sort through that.
Okay. It was the example I had in front of me, and we kind of said, these are forever. And now we're saying, well, I literally have an example in front of me and someone coming back and saying, no, it's not forever. I don't want it to be forever. And I want to make sure that these are truly binding.
We've
binding.
told them no many times.
Oh, you've told them no many times. Okay. Good to know. Representative Knodel, you've been waiting a long time. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I have to say that I've heard of a lot of excuse-making in your testimony here today when we reference ambiguous laws and outdated computer systems, things like that. That's really just excuse-making. And a professional, or in the professional world, will make the best of whatever their situation is. Number one, they accept the position, knowing what they're walking into and the resources that are available to them. So there's a lot of improvement needed in that area by the management of DPI. And we see it in the failure of showing up here by the superintendent. Whether that invitation got lost in the mail or not, I'm not sure. But the invitation was extended, and it was ignored. And I have a question for you. When it comes to professional development, some of the resources I've seen that DPI links to for teachers to use in their classroom that could be presented to students. And I want to ask your opinion if this, I'm looking at a graphic of anal sex. Do you need to see it? I can pass it around. I'll get to the question, sir, when you are chairing the committee, then I'll take your advice. The question is, if this graphic or similar graphic was shared with a teacher, between a teacher and a student, and the teacher adds the words you and me to either of these two individuals here in this picture, would that be immoral?
I have no idea what you're referencing.
Do you want to see it? This comes from.
Are we really going to wave?
He's trying to make a
images around
point
in public
about
with the camera. Well, do it without offending people.
Sir, we don't.
Watching at home.
Again,
about
you're
where
not,
we draw
you're
the
not
line
chair,
on immoral conduct.
So
Immoral conduct
we
right
don't
before our
have
eyes.
we don't have props on the floor
But
in the
this is a-
assembly. But this is a committee meeting
Madam
and a
Chair,
hearing.
come on. I mean-
So we're going to reference this. So you have no
But
opinion
this is-
on that.
This is a representative.
It's fine. We're good.
Representative, this
I'll-
is a, please clarify, this is a professional development document recommended by DPI.
Exactly.
Okay.
Where is this from? Like, it's kind of like the...
A curriculum example from Positive Prevention Plus, as we see being accessed by the Wauwatosa School District. So which can be linked through through DPI. So that's my question. So if you can't opine on if that would be immoral,
we don't do curriculum.
You put out curriculum, we'll call it suggestions or what, curriculum availability, whether the local school district accesses it or not can be made at the local level. I understand that, but these are resources that DPI puts out.
This is a recommendation available through DPI? Okay.
But, so if you can't say that that's immoral, if
Representative, we're not...
Well, I'll ask the questions, and you can answer.
Okay, well, let's back up again. And outside of the context, because the context is bizarre to me, and I don't understand where you're getting this from, but let's go back to your actual question then. You're saying that if a teacher, an educator, sends a picture of anal sex to a student and says, you plus me, that would be a grooming or way over the line, and we would immediately investigate and seek to revoke.
Okay.
That's your question,
that.
right?
And I agree. But however, that teacher or other teachers could use this same graphic in the classroom. And it's completely fine.
I don't know what you have, what you're referencing, and what you're talking about.
Thanks. I'm happy to share this documentation with you.
Are there any other questions from the committee? Question? Representative Cruz?
Well, I mean, it's going to be a real question. Could you please let me know what year lifetime licensure began?
2017?
2018. If you look at the 2017-19 biennial budget, you'll find both requirements in the non-STAP section as to changes that were required in our administrative code, which led to a repeal and recreation of that code to kind of basically what you see today with some differences over the years. And then on top of that, there was the change to lifetime license that was also delineated in that space. Yeah.
How does the lifetime license thing relate to sexual misconduct?
Yeah.
As it relates to sexual misconduct and investigations.
So could you please explain to the body how lifetime licensure differs from the process in place prior to the transition from one to the other?
So prior to
Can you keep it within the scope of background checks or protective measures?
So the background check process would have been the same, right? Very much the same what you see now in terms of processes that you would need to move through and check. The one difference between 2018, like post July 1, 2018 and pre, is lifetime licenses are considered ongoing, so they're in effect until an action is taken on that license. the other, so if something comes up, right, if they get put under investigation, that license continues until we take an action on it. They also have a different kind of application. Not everybody probably needs to know this, but it's called a 5900. And that application is basically the verification of employment and then the background check. And so it's kind of it's just less, right, that you have to show in order to keep that license in effect.
Part of that comes in relation to what we're talking about here is that certain additional professional requirements and training were significantly easier to do in a continuing evaluation cycle of licenses than a lifetime. In a lifetime license space, we need statutory requirement to dictate training instead of being able to condition license renewal on continuing education related to topics. Trying to ground it back for you, Chairperson.
Yeah, so I raise it just speculating as to whether or not there's a correlation between the descaling of the profession and an increase in unprofessional behavior as it relates to the hearing.
So related to your question, if I may, there are other licenses that people get that don't require education around professional boundaries, right? So if you go through an educator preparation program, that's going to be part of your curriculum, right? You're going to talk about ethics, you're going to talk about boundaries. Those conversations don't happen in any other space in the training, right? If you're coming in on an experience-based license, if you're coming in through the American Board for the Certification of Teacher Excellence, which is the online-only program that leads to a full Tier 2 license under state law. That doesn't happen if you are getting one of the other Tier 1 licenses because you're still in training, right? If you're on a 1-year license with stipulations, you're still in training. So to Tom's point about training, if there's a training requirement, we can make sure that regardless of whether you graduated from an educator preparation program or whether you're coming in a different path or you're working while you're training still, that you have what you need to make effective and good decisions in a preventative manner, because sometimes what we see is bad decisions, right? And also so people are more aware of their responsibilities to say something and work when they suspect things. And I'm not talking, when we're talking about grooming, that's more than the obvious sometimes, right? It's patterns of behavior.
Thank you. Representative Sortwell?
I have two questions, one based off of what was just being asked. I was going to let the other one go, but since I'm asking the question, I'll ask it now. You've proposed as one of your aids to help with this is the updating of your system, which if it's anything like the DISPIS system upgrade, you're talking millions of dollars, and of course DISPIS does a whole lot of licenses. Just wondering, in consideration of this, have you had discussions with DISPIS just to find out if you could actually simply use the same system and save the state millions of dollars?
We have, actually.
Okay.
And part of the reason that we moved from RFI to RFP is because we need to know a competitive cost so that we can save the state money. If we use a piggyback or a rider onto an existing contract, that's sort of a name your price and negotiation style of getting a product. And in past experiences with other IT projects at the state level, that can be a cash suck for you folks who I know are concerned about making sure that every dollar counts. So we are trying to create a competitive marketplace, and if that vendor chooses to submit to RFP, they did give us some information on RFI, we would love to consider them.
All vendors who were contacted or who applied to the RFI were also contacted and notified by DOA when the RFP went out as part of the state contracting process.
Thank you. And the other question I just had is, you've cited training now a couple of times. And I have a really difficult time thinking that whatever pathway somebody is coming through, that they don't understand the concept of, in our schools, we don't tolerate grooming, which is what we're talking about. I realize there's other things that could be considered unethical behavior or whatever, too. I get that, and maybe that could be more occupation specific. But I'm pretty sure you could grab man or woman on the street and ask them if it's a professional standard or immoral conduct to groom children. I'm pretty sure you don't need training on that. Would you like to respond to that idea?
I would, based on what a number of national experts in this would give you. You would find out that most people don't go into the profession. I think there's a misconception I'm hearing here that people will go to undergraduate school through a licensing process, find a job just to groom a kid. Most of the time, these cases are starting with some sort of boundary violation issue that is demonstrating that, hey, if I can get away with this, what comes next? How do I move next? What can happen next? So what our goal in a training would not be to say, do you think grooming is good or bad? If you say yes, you're out of the field. It would be to put some effort into identifying how boundary violations start, how they happen, how you can stop them, how you can set up safe professional relationships with students, how you can keep any sort of behavior from entering that level that will put you under investigation from the Department of Public Instruction. That is worth training on. That is absolutely worth training on.
Thank you. Madam Chairwoman, I'd just like to point out that I can think of a great way that they can find the resources for those trainings. Stop spending $80,000 to send people to DEI training in Green Bay. Thank you.
Continuously looking for efficiencies and money savings in this committee. I just wanted to roll back. I wrote down at the top of my page, Dr. Underly is expressing urgency in the clarification of the law. Was that you, Rich? Said that? I believe so. Okay. I'm like, somebody said it. I can't remember who said it. Okay. All right. Anybody else? More questions? More questions? Seeing no more questions from the committee, we thank you for your time and preparation today and your willingness to work together. I'm sure we'll be talking to you again soon in a bipartisan manner.
I do want to note, on this topic, Representative Dr. Underly was invited to the Legislative Audit Bureau on the 5th, similar crossover of flavor on this to start an audit, I believe, on these, and she will be attending that. So
great. I was just going to announce that the Joint Audit Committee has announced a proposed audit on educational licensure, revocation, suspension, restriction, and investigation for the Department of Public Instruction. So we're going to look forward to see where that goes and how we can use the information coming out of an audit like that to do that continuous improvement that I just mentioned. To keep our kids safe, right? Okay, thank you very much. Well, that concludes the informational hearing portion of our day. We will now move into executive session. I think maybe I'll have the clerk call the roll again for executive session.
Yes. Representative Nedwesky?
Here.
Representative Sortwell?
Here.
Representative August is excused. Representative Gustafson? Here. Representative Steffen? Representative Knodel?
Here.
Representative Baer? Here. Representative Hong? Here. Representative Cruz?
Here. Thank you. So coming into this morning, I had, as you heard me say earlier, very serious concerns about Jill Underly's potentially unsafe interpretation of Wisconsin Statute 11531. I read both of the quotes from her first and second letters. They're very confusing. It doesn't sound like she's really clear on the law. We heard that she's expressing urgency and clarification of the law. I think it's unclear at this time whether the top leader of our state's education system believes that grooming and professional boundary violations fall under immoral conduct, or they don't, and she's sort of not sure. And how do we after years and years of having the same statute in place, all of a sudden need clarification? And her role bears great weight in the state in guiding how school districts proceed with these types of situations. So I think it's important to address this urgency. Are they allowed to consider grooming when investigating teacher behavior? Are they supposed to ignore grooming behavior? We're not real sure. It's not really explicit in the statute, according to her, so all of a sudden it's unclear. I have really great concerns that her interpretation of immoral conduct as it relates to grooming is extremely dangerous and leaves our children in a potentially unsafe and vulnerable situation. Her confusing statement could potentially throw schools into chaos. How are they supposed to handle grooming and professional boundary violations if the state superintendent says she's not sure of how to interpret the statute? I'm very confident, as I've stated before, that the public would agree that grooming is immoral conduct, that grooming is a behavior that is absolutely contrary to commonly accepted moral or ethical standards and endangers the health, safety, welfare, and education of pupils, per the law's definition. The way the law is written, 11531, is already adequate in its definition. It does not need to have the word grooming listed explicitly in it to be considered immoral conduct. How is it that Dr. Underly is so unsure about this common sense definition? Perhaps the next time we see her, she can define what a woman is, too. It's evident that we need a solid and clear interpretation that grooming is immoral conduct under the law and doesn't cause harm. So therefore, do you have those with you? The clerk will be sharing with you a draft motion that I prepared.
Pass those out that direction, including ledge council and then the
Mhm.
extras. Do you want to pick up the extras on that side?
I'd like to move that the Assembly Committee on Government Operations, Transparency, and Accountability refers this matter to the Assembly Committee on Organization to consider submitting a request for an opinion to the Attorney General of Wisconsin. The request would ask the Attorney General, Josh Kaul, to answer the following question. Per the definition of immoral conduct in Wisconsin Statutes 115.13, is grooming contrary to commonly accepted moral or ethical standards, and does grooming endanger the health, safety, welfare, or education of a pupil? This is a yes or no question. Is there a second to my motion?
I'll second.
Madam Chair,
Yeah, we're going to enter discussion.
Okay. I think I
haven't recognized you. So I want to give everybody a chance to read the motion.
well, that was asked about.
You want to take 5 minutes?
Yeah, maybe 20, just to have a chance to review and talk with Ledge Council.
Sure.
Okay.
We're going to take 10 minutes. We'll start up again at, well, I gave you till 2:20.
All right. Thank you.
We will stand informal in recess until 2:20.
State government should be as open and accessible as your favorite state park or hiking trail. Preserving a transparent and accountable democracy is just as vital as protecting the natural wonders we cherish. Wisconsin's parks and lakes are treasures we want to safeguard for future generations. We must also care for the foundations of our democracy: openness, access, and truth. Ask yourself, what kind of Wisconsin do I want for my children? One where democracy is as accessible and inviting as our scenic trails? Supporting Wisconsin Eye is a way to make that vision a reality. Donate to wiseye.org/donate or text WISI to 44321. State government should be as open and accessible as your favorite state park or hiking trail. Preserving a transparent and accountable democracy is just as vital as protecting the natural wonders we cherish. Wisconsin's parks and lakes are treasures we want to safeguard for future generations. We must also care for the foundations of our democracy: openness, access, and truth. Ask yourself, what kind of Wisconsin do I want for my children? One where democracy is as accessible and inviting as our scenic trails? Supporting Wisconsin Eye is a way to make that vision a reality. Donate to wiseye.org/donate or text WISI to 44321.
Everyone is returned? Okay, we're open for discussion on the motion. No discussion? Okay, I guess we'll go to a vote. The clerk will take the roll call.
Representative Nedwesky.
Aye.
Representative Sortwell.
Yes.
Representative August is excused. Representative Gustafson.
Yes.
Representative Steffen is excused. Representative Knodel.
Aye.
Representative Bear. Aye. Representative Hong. Aye. Representative Cruz. Aye.
Motion passes. Are there any more proposed items for action on today's discussion? Seeing none, this executive session is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
You have been watching a production of Wisconsin Eye, your unfiltered window into legislative deliberations and public policy programming, where our mission is to provide Wisconsinites an opportunity to access the legislative process and connect with conversations that inform our citizenry. Please consider supporting our mission, and thank you for watching. Wisconsin Eye, policy made public.
State government should be as open and accessible as your favorite state park or hiking trail. Preserving a transparent and accountable democracy is just as vital as protecting the natural wonders we cherish. Wisconsin's parks and lakes are treasures we want to safeguard for future generations. We must also care for the foundations of our democracy: openness, access, and truth. Ask yourself, what kind of Wisconsin do I want for my children? One where democracy is as accessible and inviting as our scenic trails? Supporting Wisconsin Eye is a way to make that vision a reality. Donate to wiseye.org/donate or text WIS-I to 44321.